They thought he was just the janitor. That was their last mistake. In under 4 minutes, a man in a gray maintenance uniform, hands still smelling of industrial cleaner, put 6 trained gunmen on the floor of the most expensive ballroom in the city. No backup. No weapons except what he found. No hesitation. The cameras caught all of it. Every move. Every decision. Federal agents would later watch the footage 17 times and still not fully believe what they were seeing. His name is Damon Cross, and this is the story of the night he stopped being invisible. If this story grabs you from the first minute, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happened inside that building will change the way you see the quiet man standing in the corner of every room you've ever walked into. The service elevator smelled like old grease and someone's forgotten lunch. Damon Cross stood in the corner of it, mop handle resting against his shoulder, watching the floor numbers climb, 14, 15, 16, and thinking about whether his daughter had remembered to take her inhaler before school that morning. He was almost certain she hadn't. Lily was 9 years old and believed with absolute conviction that inhalers were for babies and people who gave up, a philosophy she'd apparently developed sometime around 2nd grade and refused to abandon regardless of how many times she'd ended up sitting on the gymnasium floor, unable to breathe. She had her mother's stubbornness. Damon had stopped finding that quality charming sometime around her 3rd emergency inhaler refill of the year. He made a mental note to text her after the shift started, then remembered she was at school and couldn't have her phone until 3:15. Then remembered he was starting a 12-hour shift covering for Marcus, who had thrown out his back moving a water heater, and that 12 hours from now it would be well past midnight and Lily would be asleep at Mrs. Petrakis' apartment downstairs, which meant he wouldn't see her until morning. The elevator opened on the 32nd floor. The noise hit him first. Laughter, the kind that costs money, the kind that comes from people who've never had to think about whether they can afford the bottle they're opening. Then the smell. Expensive perfume layered over catered food, something with truffle in it probably. The hotel kitchen boys always went heavy on the truffle when the budget allowed, and tonight Ashford Industries had apparently allowed quite a budget. Damon pushed his cart out of the elevator and into the service corridor, keeping to the left wall the way maintenance staff were supposed to. Through the narrow gap between the corridor door and the frame, he could see the ballroom beyond. Chandeliers throwing soft gold light across 300 people in suits that cost more than his monthly rent. A string quartet in the far corner. An open bar that had been running since 6. Tables loaded with food that half these people wouldn't touch because they were too busy working the room. He'd seen it before. Different company, same party, same people, essentially, just wearing different names on their badges. Cross, a sharp voice behind him. He turned. Gerald Briggs, the building's facilities manager, was coming down the corridor with the particular walk of a man who believed his job title made him important. Briggs was 47, had been facilities manager for 11 years, and treated every member of his maintenance staff like they were one mistake away from being fired, which technically they were. That was the nature of the job. "Yes, sir," Damon said. "The men's restroom off the east lobby, 2nd stall. I need it cleaned and back in service before 9 o'clock. We've got guests complaining. I'll handle it. And don't use the main corridors. Mr. Ashford's people specifically said they don't want maintenance visible tonight. Go around through the kitchen passage." Damon nodded. He didn't point out that the kitchen passage added 6 minutes to the walk, and that the faster he got to the restroom, the faster it would be back in service, because that wasn't a conversation that would end well. He just nodded and pushed his cart back toward the service corridor. He had learned a long time ago how to make himself invisible. It turned out that skill transferred across a surprising number of professions. The East Lobby restroom was what it was. A stopped-up drain, a paper towel dispenser that had been yanked too hard and pulled half off the wall, the general aftermath of 200 people using one bathroom for 3 hours. Damon worked through it methodically, the way he worked through everything. Assess, prioritize, execute. Same process, whether you were clearing a building in Fallujah or unclogging a hotel toilet. He was reattaching the dispenser bracket when he heard the first sound that didn't belong. It was small. the kind of thing you'd dismiss as nothing if you weren't paying attention. A sharp click from somewhere behind the east lobby wall, followed by a silence that felt different from the silence before it. Damon had spent enough time in enough bad places to know the difference between silence that meant nothing and silence that meant someone was holding their breath. He set down the screwdriver. Through the restroom door, which he'd left slightly ajar for ventilation, he had a partial view of the east lobby. A narrow marble corridor that connected the ballroom's secondary entrance to the elevator banks. At this hour, it should have been traffic. Guests moving between the bar and the tables, servers carrying trays, the occasional assistant checking their phone. There should have been noise and movement. There was one man standing very still near the elevator bank. That alone wasn't unusual. People stood near elevators. But this man was standing with his back to the wall and his eyes moving in a specific pattern. Methodical, practiced, covering sectors rather than just looking around the way a bored guest would. His hands were at his sides. His jacket was slightly too heavy for the season and fit oddly across the left shoulder. Damon had spent 6 years in the teams. He knew what a man looked like when he was carrying under a suit jacket. He also knew what it looked like when that man was working with other people he couldn't see yet. He stayed completely still for 8 seconds, watching through the gap in the door. Then he backed away from the door quietly, picked up his phone, and typed a text to 911. Armed individual East Lobby 32nd floor Meridian Tower. Possible coordinated event. Send units immediately. He sent it, then pocketed the phone. He knew the response time to this part of the city on a Friday night. 12 to 15 minutes if they moved fast. Probably longer. Whatever was happening, 12 minutes was a long time. He looked around the restroom, taking inventory the way he always took inventory. Paper towel dispenser bracket. Metal. 8 inches. Drain snake. Coiled steel cable. Workable. Bottle of industrial cleaner. Flammable. Useful, depending on what you needed it to do. His cart outside in the corridor, which he couldn't get to without passing through the lobby. Not much, but enough. He was calculating the geometry of the east lobby, angles, distances, where the cover was, when the first gunshot cracked somewhere on the other side of the ballroom wall, and then the screaming started. Inside the ballroom, the evening had been going exactly the way Vivian Ashford had planned it, which was to say, perfectly, and also slightly too perfectly, in the way that made her feel like something was about to go wrong. She was standing near the head table when the lights changed, just slightly, a flicker that lasted less than a second, and her assistant Elena materialized at her elbow with the expression that meant there was a problem. "The Meridian server connection just dropped," Elena said quietly. All the encrypted drives went offline at the same moment. "Technical issue?" Vivian asked. "Maybe. IT says the signal was jammed from inside the building." Vivian set down her champagne glass. She was 30 years old and had built Ashford Industries from a concept in a borrowed conference room into a $2.3 billion defense technology firm in 8 years, and she had not done that by ignoring things that didn't add up. A signal jam from inside the building during the launch party for their most sensitive product was not a technical issue. "Where's Marcus Chen?" she asked. Chen was her head of security, ex-military, the man she trusted to handle exactly this kind of situation. "I can't reach him. His radio went quiet about 6 minutes ago." That was when the doors came open. There were 5 of them, moving through the secondary entrance in a formation that Vivian registered as practiced even before her brain had processed that they were carrying weapons. They fanned out across the ballroom floor with a speed and precision that cut off every exit before the crowd fully understood what was happening. One of them fired a single shot into the ceiling, plaster dust, screaming, 300 people dropping to the floor as one. "Nobody move." The voice came from the man in front, tall, dark jacket, earpiece, visible on the left. He spoke without raising his voice, which somehow made it worse. "This will take as long as it takes. The less you fight, the less anyone gets hurt." The room went very, very still. Vivian didn't move. She stood at the head table with her hands at her sides, watching them with the cold part of her brain that she'd trained to function under pressure. She counted the gunmen. 5 visible, probably more she couldn't see yet. She looked for Marcus Chen and didn't find him anywhere in the room. She noted that two of the men were moving through the crowd toward her specifically, not toward the room in general. They knew exactly who they were here for. She stayed still and kept her face neutral and thought, someone is going to have to stop this, and right now I don't see who. Damon came out of the east restroom corridor at a run. Not the panicked run of someone fleeing, but the low, controlled sprint of someone moving toward a problem. He needed eyes on the room before he did anything else. Situational awareness before action. Always. You did not commit to a plan you hadn't assessed. He came through the service corridor door that led out into the ballroom's kitchen access point and stopped behind a catering cart, using it for cover while he took in the scene. 5 gunmen spread across the room. Position, field of fire, sight lines. He cataloged it in roughly 3 seconds. The nearest man was 12 feet away, positioned to cover the main exit, back partly turned. The 2 men moving through the crowd were heading toward the head table, toward the woman in the dark green dress who was standing too still to be just a scared guest. The other 2 were flanking the secondary exit and the elevator bank. 12 feet to the nearest gunman, kitchen access behind him with steel countertops, heavy equipment, controlled choke points. A catering cart loaded with dinner service for the room, heavy silver lids, a rack of flatware, an insulated coffee urn that he estimated at 30 to 40 pounds full. 300 civilians on the floor, most of them frozen, a handful who looked like they might do something stupid in the next 30 seconds. Damon made his decisions quickly and without ceremony, the way you had to when decisions cost lives. He picked up the heavy coffee urn from the cart, moved 3 steps to his left for a better angle, and threw it. It hit the nearest gunman square in the back of the head. The man went down without making a sound, which was what happened when 2 inches of insulated steel connected with someone's skull at the right velocity. Damon was already moving before the urn finished rolling, crossing the distance in 4 steps, and taking the man's weapon, a compact submachine gun, safety on, round-chambered, and radio in one motion, then pulling the unconscious man behind the catering cart. He checked the radio frequency. The earpiece crackle was continuous chatter. At least 3 other voices he could hear. They were coordinating something. He listened for 4 seconds while pressing flat against the cart. Ashford is at the head table, north side. Casper and Yuri are converging. Victor, confirm east corridor clear. East is clear. North team, extract only. Do not engage crowd unless forced. Extract only. They weren't here to kill 300 people. They were here to take one, which meant the killing would start if anyone got in the way of the extraction, or if their timeline fell apart. He pulled out the earpiece so they couldn't use the radio to locate him, pocketed it, and moved. The 2 men, Casper and Yuri, apparently, were 8 feet from Vivian when the first one stopped walking. He stopped because something crashed loudly on the far side of the ballroom, and the man nearest the kitchen service door had simply disappeared, and in his earpiece a voice was saying something confused about Victor not responding. He put his hand up to signal Yuri to wait and turned to look. That was the moment Vivian Ashford made a decision. She did not have combat training. She did not have a weapon. What she had was the catering table in front of her, which was covered in a floor-length tablecloth, and approximately 1.5 seconds while the gunman's attention was elsewhere. She dropped below the table. "Hey!" Casper started spinning back. He found Vivian gone, and Elena crouched under the table next to her, both of them pressed against the legs of the table. And then a maintenance worker in a gray uniform appeared from absolutely nowhere and hit him with something that moved faster than Casper's ability to track it. Damon had crossed the room using the panicked crowd as cover, people flattening themselves against the floor, creating a corridor of chaos that he moved through while the gunman's eyes were pulled toward the kitchen side of the room. He came at Casper from the left, outside his visual field, and used a controlled strike to his throat and the base of his skull in quick sequence. Not a killing blow, but enough to put him down for several minutes and keep him down. Yuri was faster. Yuri had been watching his partner rather than the crowd, and he was already raising his weapon when Damon grabbed Casper's falling body and used it as a shield, letting the shot that would have taken Damon in the chest hit Casper's body armor instead. The impact was enough to stagger Damon back a step, and Yuri was coming forward with the weapon tracking, and Damon did the thing you didn't do if you were thinking in normal terms. He threw Casper's body at Yuri, not as a shield this time, but as a projectile, 190 pounds of dead weight at a distance of 4 feet. Yuri went down under the weight of it. By the time he'd shoved Casper off and gotten his weapon back up, Damon was on him, and the weapon wasn't going to help Yuri anymore because Damon had his wrist at an angle that meant either Yuri let go or his wrist broke. And after half a second of trying, Yuri let go. The whole thing had taken 11 seconds. The ballroom was watching. 300 people on the floor, and every one of them had just watched the maintenance worker dismantle 2 armed men in the time it takes to tie a shoe. The silence had a quality to it that Damon recognized and did not want. It was the silence of people about to react, and any reaction right now was going to get someone killed. "Stay down," he said, loud enough to carry across the room. Not a shout, a voice that left no room for interpretation. "All of you, stay exactly where you are and do not move. This is not finished." The room stayed down. He crouched next to the head table. "Ms. Ashford," he said quietly. A pause. Then, "How do you know my name?" "Your picture is on the wall of the lobby. I've worked in this building for 2 years. He scanned the room from his low position. The remaining 3 gunmen were repositioning. He could tell from the radio noise still bleeding through the earpiece he'd pocketed. They knew something had gone wrong. "I need you to stay under this table and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Yes." "Good." He looked at the woman crouched next to Vivian. Young, dark hair, terrified in the specific way of someone trying very hard not to show it. "You too. Both of you stay below the table line. Don't move until I come back to this table." Who are you?" the young woman asked. "Maintenance," Damon said. And then he was gone. The next 4 minutes were not clean. Damon moved through the ballroom using the architecture the way he always used architecture, as a system of angles and sightlines rather than a collection of rooms. The ballroom's layout was something he'd learned without meaning to over 2 years of maintenance rounds. Where the structural columns were, where the lighting created shadows deep enough to move through, where the catering access points let you appear and disappear. The third gunman was covering the south exit and was the most professionally positioned of the remaining 3. He had his back to a column and was covering 2 directions simultaneously, which was good technique. What he didn't know was that there was a lighting fixture access panel 8 feet above his position that connected to the balcony level via a service walkway. Damon had replaced a bulb up there 4 months ago. He came down behind the third gunman and took his radio before the man knew he wasn't alone, then used the radio itself. It was a brick of a thing, dense and heavy, to end the engagement. The fourth gunman heard something and turned. "Don't," Damon said. The man looked at him, looked at the weapon Damon was holding. His own colleague's weapon, pointed with the steadiness of someone who had spent years not missing. Looked at the 3 colleagues he could no longer see anywhere in the ballroom. Made a calculation. He put his weapon on the floor slowly. "Kick it away from you," Damon said. The man did. "Lie down on your stomach, hands where I can see them." "You don't know what you're into," the man said. His accent was Eastern European, something in the consonants. "This goes higher than tonight. You understand? They will not stop." "I'm sure they won't," Damon said. "Lie down." The man lay down. That left the 5th gunman, the one who had been at the primary entrance, the one who had given the orders. Damon turned and found him 6 feet away, weapon already raised, and had approximately 1/4 of a second to make a decision. He went sideways and low, and the shot that would have killed him punched through the column where his head had been. He hit the floor rolling and came up with the weapon from the 4th gunman, and the 5th gunman, the leader, the professional, made his own calculation and decided the math had changed. He ran. Damon let him go. Chasing a trained operative through a building full of civilians was how you got civilians killed. He straightened up, checked the 4th gunman was still face down, looked across the ballroom. 300 people on the floor, all staring at him. He looked at the service door. He looked at the main entrance where he could already hear sounds from outside, shouting, the crackle of police radios, the elevator chiming. Someone had called it in. Backup was arriving. Good. He walked back to the head table and crouched down. Vivian Ashford was still there, exactly where he'd told her to be, which meant she'd actually listened. That was something. Elena was next to her, phone in hand, already on the line with someone. "You can come out," Damon said. Vivian emerged from under the table. She was, he noticed, not shaking. She had the look of someone who was running on the kind of controlled adrenaline that would crash later. She'd be shaking then, alone somewhere, and that was probably healthier than shaking now. Her green dress had a tear along the hem from where she'd dropped to the floor. Her hair, which had been professionally arranged at the start of the evening, had come mostly undone. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the way people usually looked at him, the way they looked past him, through him, the way you looked at maintenance workers because you'd learned not to really see them. She looked at him directly, with the focused attention of someone who was trying to understand something that didn't fit any category she had. "You're the maintenance man," she said. It wasn't a question, it was an attempt to reconcile what she was seeing with what she thought she knew. "Yes, ma'am." "You just—" She stopped. Started again. "How did you—" "We should get you to a safe location before the police clear the building," Damon said. "There was one who ran. The area isn't fully secure." She looked at him for another beat, then nodded. Whatever questions she had, she was smart enough to sort by priority. "Right," she said. "Okay?" A pause. "Thank you." Damon nodded once. He didn't say you're welcome. What he said was, "The police will want to talk to you. Tell them everything." Then he stepped back, because the first officers were coming through the main doors, and the scene was about to become very loud and very complicated, and he needed to think clearly about the next several minutes before it did. What he didn't know yet, what none of them knew yet, was that one of the downed gunmen had already regained consciousness. Not Yuri, who was still out, and not Casper, who would need a hospital. The third one, the one from the south exit. He'd come around in the confusion, and he was lying very still, watching the room, and he had already pulled out a secondary phone and sent a message to a number that no law enforcement database contained. The message was 4 words. "Cross is alive, confirmed." He put the phone back in his pocket and closed his eyes and waited for the police to find him, because getting arrested wasn't the problem right now. The problem, or rather the solution, was already in motion somewhere above them, in a server room 3 floors up, where a man with a laptop and a very specific set of instructions had already begun pulling a file. A classified file. A file with a photograph on the first page. A younger man, harder looking, different haircut, different eyes almost, and a name across the top in red letters. Cross, Damon A. Classified. C. Wolf Operation. Status, deceased, unconfirmed, was... The police took statements for 3 hours. Damon sat in a chair near the service corridor entrance and answered questions in the careful, measured way he'd learned, answered questions most efficiently. Specific enough to be useful, brief enough not to invite follow-ups. The detective assigned to him was a woman named Reyes, mid-40s, smart eyes, the kind of tired that came from long-term rather than tonight specifically. She looked at him the same way Vivian had, like she was trying to add up numbers that weren't quite adding up. "Mr. Cross," she said, reviewing her notes, "you said you spent time in the military." "Yes." "What branch?" "Navy." She wrote that down. "And your current position is building maintenance supervisor." "Maintenance worker," he said. "I don't supervise anyone." "Right." She looked up. "Mr. Cross, what I'm trying to understand is how a maintenance worker managed to single-handedly neutralize 4 armed operatives in a ballroom full of 300 people without a single civilian casualty." Damon said nothing for a moment. Then, "I saw an opportunity, and I took it." "An opportunity?" "Yes." Reyes looked at him for a long time. "The FBI is going to want to talk to you." "I figured." "They're going to ask a lot more questions than I am." "I know." She studied him. "Is there anything you want to tell me right now before they get here? Off the record, just between us?" Damon looked at his hands. They were clean. He'd washed them at some point. He wasn't sure exactly when. The knuckles were slightly reddened on the right hand, which was normal after the kind of evening it had been, and he was aware of a dull ache along his left ribs that meant he'd taken a hit. At some point he hadn't fully registered at the time. "No," he said. "I just did what I had to do." Reyes nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer. She clicked her pen and stood up. "All right, The FBI agents will be here in about 20 minutes. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Coffee would be good, Damon said. Thank you. She left. Damon sat in the chair and stared at the floor and thought about Lily. It was nearly midnight. Lily would be asleep at Mrs. Petrakis's apartment downstairs from their place, bundled up in the extra blankets the old woman kept specifically for when she babysat, probably with the television on low the way Lily liked it, even when she was sleeping, some nature documentary about the ocean or the rainforest, something with a narrator whose voice was calm and steady. He thought about the fact that tomorrow morning he was going to have to explain to Lily why he'd been in the news. She watched the news sometimes. She'd gotten that habit from him, 10 minutes after dinner, which he'd started because he believed in being informed, and had gradually become aware was maybe a mixed habit to instill in a 9-year-old. She was going to see the building. She might see his name. He thought about whether his name being in the news was the worst problem he was facing right now. He was increasingly certain it wasn't. The gunman's words had lodged in the back of his mind like a splinter. This goes higher than tonight. They will not stop. Professional soldiers said a lot of things, some true, some designed to make you doubt yourself. But the words that stuck were not those. The words that stuck were the ones the third gunman had said just before Damon took him down. He'd said them very quietly, under his breath, almost to himself, in a language that wasn't English. Russian, old-form military dialect, the kind you didn't learn anywhere except specific operations environments. He'd said, "It's the ghost. It's actually the ghost." Damon had understood every word, and he'd spent the last 3 hours sitting with the weight of what that meant, which was this. Whoever had sent these men knew who he was. Not who he was now, not the maintenance worker, the single father, the man who existed in this city under a carefully ordinary life. They knew who he'd been. They knew the operation. They knew the name they'd used for him in the teams, which meant somewhere between 6 years ago and tonight, someone had done a lot of work to find a man who was supposed to be dead. The question that kept circling him, the one he couldn't answer sitting in this chair, the one that was going to keep circling until he had more information, was why. Why tonight? Why this building? Why Vivian Ashford? What did she have that was worth this level of operation? He didn't have the answer, but he was starting to understand that finding it was going to matter. Not for himself. He'd made peace with his own risks a long time ago. But because whatever was in motion tonight hadn't stopped when the police walked through those doors. The leader had run. The message the third gunman had sent, Damon hadn't seen it, but he knew there had been one because there was always a message, had gone somewhere. And somewhere out there, someone now knew that Damon Cross was not dead after all. He picked up the paper cup of coffee that Detective Reyes had sent over and took a sip. It was bad. Precinct quality, stale, slightly burnt. And it was exactly what he needed. He had 20 minutes before the FBI arrived. He used 15 of them to think, to map what he knew. To begin building, in the back of his mind, the kind of plan he'd thought he would never need to build again. The last 5 minutes he used to text Mrs. Petrakis that he would be late, that Lily should stay put in the morning until he called, and that he was fine. Then he set down the cup and waited. Vivian Ashford was in a conference room 2 floors down, in a chair that probably cost $400, doing what she always did when she was frightened. She was working. Her laptop was open, her phone was beside it, and she had already sent 7 emails. To her legal team, to her board's chair, to the company's crisis communications firm, and to 3 federal regulatory contacts who were going to need to know about tonight. Elena was beside her, taking notes. The FBI agent assigned to Vivian's statement had given her an astonished look when she'd asked for her laptop and then, to his credit, had simply gotten out of the way. But the emails weren't really why the laptop was open. The laptop was open because Vivian needed to look at something that had been in the back of her mind since the gunman came through the doors, something she'd been trying not to look directly at, because looking at it directly would mean acknowledging something she'd been half aware of for weeks, and had chosen, for reasons she wasn't proud of, to leave unexamined. She opened a file, a project file, encrypted, labeled internally as Project Nightingale. Her company's most advanced work, A defense navigation system so precise it would fundamentally change how certain classified operations were conducted. 2 years of development, $94 million in R&D costs. The thing they'd been quietly, carefully showing to defense contractors for the past 6 months. She looked at the file. She looked at the access log. And her stomach dropped, because the access log showed something she hadn't put there. An external connection 11 days ago that had reached into the project files and copied a specific subset of the technical documentation. Not all of it. Whoever had done it was either pressed for time or specifically knew which components they needed. But enough. Enough to build something. She stared at the screen and understood, with the cold clarity that fear sometimes produced, that the men who had come through those doors tonight hadn't been trying to steal the technology. They'd already stolen it. They were here for her because she was the only person who could identify what they'd taken, who could work backward from the copied data to understand what they'd built, who could, potentially, reverse engineer their use of it. They hadn't come to take the weapon. They'd come to silence the person who could explain how it worked. She closed the laptop very carefully, the way you handled something fragile. "Elena," she said quietly, "I need you to step out for a moment." Elena looked at her. Vivian rarely asked Elena for privacy. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I just need a minute alone." After Elena left, Vivian sat in the expensive chair in the conference room and put her head in her hands and breathed slowly for 30 seconds. Not crying, she wasn't there yet. Just breathing. Just letting herself be exactly as frightened as she was, privately, for 30 seconds, before she put her CEO face back on and dealt with what was in front of her. 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and asked the FBI agent outside to come back in. "I have something you need to see," she said, "and I need you to take me seriously when I tell you that what I'm going to show you is bigger than what happened in that ballroom tonight." The agent sat down across from her. "I'm listening," he said. Vivian turned the laptop around and began to explain. 2 floors up, in a chair near a service corridor, a maintenance worker in a gray uniform was having a similar conversation with different agents, and though neither of them knew it yet, what they were separately beginning to understand was the same truth, the same thread pulling tight around both of them, pulling them together whether they chose it or not. Tonight had been the opening move, and whoever had made it had been planning it for a very long time. Show more. The FBI agents arrived in pairs, which Damon had expected, and they brought with them the particular energy of people who had been pulled from something else and were not entirely happy about it. The lead agent was a man named Harlow, late 40s, silver at the temples. The careful posture of someone who'd spent years interviewing people and learned that how you sat in a chair told you almost as much as what someone said. His partner was younger, a woman named Tate, who took notes on a tablet and said very little and watched Damon with the focused attention of someone running calculations. They started with the standard questions: name, address, employment history, how long he'd worked in the building. Damon answered everything accurately. He had no reason to lie about any of it, and lying about checkable facts to federal investigators was the kind of mistake that turned a cooperative witness into a person of interest. "Walk me through the timeline again," Harlow said. "From the moment you first noticed something was wrong." Damon walked them through it. The man near the elevator bank. The posture, the jacket, the eye movement, the shot into the ceiling, the decisions he'd made in the bathroom and then in the ballroom. Harlow listened without interrupting. When Damon finished, the agent was quiet for a moment, looking at his notes rather than at Damon, which was a technique, making the subject fill the silence. Damon didn't fill it. "You said you served in the Navy," Harlow said finally. "Yes." "What rate?" "Special warfare operator." Harlow looked up. "SEAL." "Yes." "How long?" 8 years active. I got out 6 years ago." Harlow set down his pen. Not dramatically, just set it down, the way you did when the conversation shifted into territory where you weren't taking notes anymore. "Mr. Cross, I'm going to be straight with you, because I think that's going to save us both a lot of time. What you did in that ballroom tonight, the tactics, the sequencing, the way you moved through that space, that's not 8 years in the teams and then 6 years pushing a mop. That's someone who's been operational very recently, or someone who is doing something a lot more specialized than standard SEAL work. Damon looked at him steadily. I remember my training. Nobody remembers their training like that. I do. The two men looked at each other. Tate kept her eyes on her tablet, but her stylus had stopped moving. There's going to be a deeper background pull on you, Harlow said. You know that. I know. And if there are things in that background that are classified, then the people with the right clearance will see them, Damon said, and they'll make whatever decisions they make. I understand how it works. Harlow picked up his pen again, wrote something down. One of the men you engaged, the one from the south exit, his prints came back in the system. Victor Solin. He's a contractor, former Russian Special Forces, operates under about 6 different identities. He's been on Interpol's watch list for 4 years. He paused. He's not the kind of person you send to rough up a rich CEO. He's the kind of person you send when you need something done without leaving loose ends. Damon said nothing. The man who ran, we don't have an ID yet, but based on the others, we're looking at a professional extraction team. High-end, well-financed. Harlow leaned forward slightly, which raises the question of why they targeted Vivian Ashford, and why, of all the people in that ballroom, it was her building's maintenance worker who knew how to stop them. I saw an opportunity, Damon said again. Harlow gave him a look that communicated, without any particular hostility, that he found this answer approximately as satisfying the second time as the first. We're going to need you to come in tomorrow morning, he said. Formal interview, recorded. There are people above my pay grade who are going to want to talk to you. What time? 8 o'clock. Federal building downtown, you know it? I know it. Don't leave the city tonight. I wasn't planning to. Damon stood up, and the ache in his ribs sharpened, and he kept his face neutral about it. Am I free to go? Harlow studied him for a long moment. For now, he said. Damon walked out of the conference room and into the corridor and stood there for a second, letting the noise of the scene wash over him. Officers, investigators, EMTs still processing the room. A crime scene tech photographing the area where Casper had gone down. Someone was interviewing a group of guests near the elevator bank, and one of the men in the group was crying, which happened sometimes. The adrenaline drop hitting different people at different thresholds. He located his maintenance cart where he'd left it in the service corridor, retrieved it, and pushed it toward the service elevator. No one stopped him. He was again invisible. The maintenance worker. Background noise. Part of the building's infrastructure rather than the night's events. He got in the elevator, pressed the button for the parking level, and as the doors closed, he allowed himself, privately and briefly, to feel the full weight of what he already knew was coming. The ghost was out of the ground, and the people who'd been looking for him were not going to stop looking. The drive home took 23 minutes. He parked on the street rather than the building garage because old habits held even when they probably didn't matter anymore, and he sat in the car for 5 minutes after turning off the engine, watching the street through the windshield. Quiet residential block, 3 in the morning, a dog barking somewhere 2 buildings over. Normal city sounds, nothing that didn't belong. He got out of the car, went upstairs, and stood in the doorway of his apartment and looked at it the way you looked at things you might be seeing for the last time. Small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, the living room that Lily had slowly colonized with her art projects, and her books about marine biology, and the half-finished model of a blue whale that had been half-finished for about 4 months because every time they sat down to work on it, something came up. Her school backpack hanging on the hook by the door, her sneakers on the mat, toes pointed outward the way they always were. He went to bed. He did not sleep for more than an hour at a time. By 6 in the morning, he was up, coffee made, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad on which he'd written nothing but had been thinking about everything. What he knew. The team tonight was professional and well-resourced. They'd jammed the building's communications ahead of entry, neutralized the private security chief before the operation started, and deployed with a coordination that took weeks of planning. They knew the building layout. They knew Vivian Ashford's position in the room, and at least one of them, Victor Solin, or whoever had sent the message, had known him. What he didn't know, why Vivian Ashford, what she had, or what they believed she had, that was worth this level of operation, and what exactly the connection was between Ashford Industries and whatever organization had financed a team of Victor Solin's caliber. He also didn't know how much the FBI already knew about Seawolf. That was the variable that scared him most, not for himself, but for Lily. Because if Seawolf came up in the background pull, it would come up compartmentalized, and the people it would get routed to would have their own agenda, and their agenda would not necessarily include protecting a 9-year-old girl in a residential building on the 4th floor. At 7, he knocked on Mrs. Petrakis' door. The old woman opened it in her bathrobe, unsurprised in the way that people became unsurprised after a certain age. Behind her, in the living room, Lily was asleep on the fold-out couch with the television running exactly as he'd imagined, an ocean documentary narrated by someone with a British accent. "She's fine," Mrs. Petrakis said quietly. "Ate dinner, did her homework, asked me 4 questions about cephalopods. Cephalopods. Octopus, squid. She's in a phase." The old woman looked at him, at the redness on his right knuckles, at the careful way he was holding his left side. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're fine the way men always say they're fine." She shook her head. "Come in. I'll make you something to eat before you have to be wherever you're going." He wanted to say no. He said, "Thank you, Irene." He sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and ate eggs that were better than anything he'd made himself in months, and he could hear Lily breathing in the next room. And for about 15 minutes he let himself just exist in that. The sounds of the morning, the smell of the food, the ordinary weight of being somewhere safe. Then his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, blocked. He looked at it for a moment, then answered. "Cross?" The voice on the other end was male, mid-50s, with the flat inflection of career intelligence. "My name is Caldwell. I work for a department you won't find on any organizational chart. I'm going to need about 10 minutes of your time before your 8 o'clock. Damon's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "The same way I know you haven't slept, that your ribs are cracked on the left side. 2 of them, probably, given the nature of the impact. And that you've been sitting at a kitchen table since 6 a.m. working through a problem you don't have enough information to solve yet." A brief pause. "I have the information you're missing. The question is whether you want it." "Where?" "Coffee shop on Meridian and 44th. I'm already here." Damon looked at his watch, looked at the doorway to the living room where Lily was still asleep, looked at Mrs. Petrakis, who was washing dishes with the careful efficiency of someone pretending not to listen. 20 minutes, he said. Caldwell was easy to spot, not because he looked like a spy, which he didn't, but because he looked aggressively unremarkable, which amounted to the same thing. 60, maybe, with the body of someone who'd stayed reasonably fit without being obvious about it. Gray suit, no tie, coffee already in front of him. He was sitting with his back to the wall and a clear line to the exit, and he'd chosen a table that was far enough from the counter noise that conversation was possible without being overheard. Damon sat across from him without shaking hands. "Seawolf," Caldwell said. "I don't know what that is," Damon said. Caldwell almost smiled. "We can do it that way if you want. It'll take longer." He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. 18 months ago, a classified operation involving 6 Navy SEAL operators was officially recorded as a catastrophic failure. All personnel listed as killed in action. The operation itself was buried under 3 layers of classification. The official record shows nothing recoverable. He looked at Damon. But one of those operators apparently recovered just fine, changed his name through legal channels we didn't flag quickly enough, and has been working as a maintenance supervisor in this city for the past 2 years. "What do you want?" Damon said. "Right now?" To explain what Vivian Ashford walked into without knowing it. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. Ashford Industries has been developing a defense navigation system for the past 2 years. You probably know this. What you don't know is that 8 months ago, one of her senior engineers, a man named Gregory Fell, was quietly recruited by an organization we've been tracking for 3 years. A private military contractor called Helix Group. Fell copied specific technical documentation from Ashford's servers and delivered it to Helix. Vivian Ashford didn't know. If they already have the data, why go after her? Because what Fell copied was incomplete. He got the architecture but not the calibration parameters. the specific values that make the system actually work rather than just theoretically existing. Those parameters are stored in a separate encrypted partition that only Vivian Ashford has access to. Caldwell paused. They needed her to either give them the partition key voluntarily or be taken somewhere they could extract it from her. Damon processed this. The team last night wasn't there to kill her. They were going to take her. Yes, the original plan was extraction, not elimination. But when that failed, Caldwell stopped, and something shifted in his expression, something careful. Cross, the man who ran, we ID'd him an hour ago. His name is Brenner. He was the team leader and he's gone to ground, which means Helix knows the extraction failed, which means they're going to move to their fallback position, which is eliminating the asset they can't control and making sure anyone who interfered with the operation doesn't get the chance to interfere again. He looked at Damon steadily. You put 4 of their people on the floor last night. Brenner made you. Whatever story you told the FBI, Helix already knows who you actually are. They have resources you don't want to imagine. Damon was quiet for a moment. Outside the coffee shop window, the city was going about its morning. People with their coffees and their phones, a delivery truck double parked, a woman with a stroller navigating around a broken piece of sidewalk. All of it entirely unconcerned with the conversation happening inside. My daughter, Damon said. We're aware of her. The flatness of those 3 words, the casual administrative acknowledgement, landed somewhere behind Damon's sternum like a weight. He kept his face still. What does that mean? It means she's currently in a building that we're now monitoring. It means that as of approximately 90 minutes ago, Helix ran a search on your current identity and got results. Caldwell's voice was even. Not cold, just factual, the way people got when they delivered this kind of information, enough times to build a wall between themselves and the weight of it. They know about Lily. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Damon breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, once, controlled. Tell me what you need from me, he said. Caldwell reached into his jacket and placed a thin folder on the table. First, you're 8 o'clock with the FBI. I need you to keep it. Answer their questions the way you've been answering them. Don't mention this conversation. They have a different piece of this, and I need those pieces to stay separate for the moment. He tapped the folder. Second, I need you to understand what we're actually dealing with here, because the decision I'm going to put in front of you tonight requires you to have the full picture. And third? Third is tonight's problem. We'll get to it. He stood up, dropping cash on the table. Keep your phone on. And Cross, he paused. The apartment on the 4th floor. Move your daughter to the interior room when you get back, away from the windows. He left. Damon sat with the folder and his coffee and the specific kind of cold that wasn't about temperature. He thought about Lily asking 4 questions about cephalopods. He thought about the half-finished whale model on the living room floor. He thought about a promise he'd made to a woman who was no longer alive, made quietly, in a hospital room, on a night that had rearranged everything he'd thought he understood about what mattered, that Lily would have a normal life, that she would never have to know the things Damon knew, that the world he'd come from would stay where it was, behind him, behind a door he'd locked and walked away from. He opened the folder. The first page was a profile on Helix Group, private military contractor, nominally registered in the Cayman Islands, actual operational structure spread across 7 countries, funded by a consortium of interests that Caldwell had summarized in a single line. State-adjacent, non-attributable, expendable when convenient. The second page was a list of confirmed operations, redacted down to dates and outcomes, and the outcomes were uniformly bad. Coups, assassinations, corporate espionage that had destabilized defense supply chains in 3 separate NATO countries. The third page was a photograph of a man Damon recognized, not personally, but he recognized the type, the kind of man who existed in a very specific corner of the covert world, the kind who had spent so long operating in the dark that the dark had become his natural environment. The caption identified him as Radu Conescu, Helix Group's operations director, a Romanian national with a military background that had somehow never made it into any public record. He was looking at the camera in the photograph with the unconcerned expression of someone who had never believed anyone could touch him. Damon closed the folder. He got to the federal building at 5 to 8 and spent 2 hours in a recorded interview with Harlow and Tate and 2 people from a different agency who didn't introduce themselves. He answered everything he'd answered the night before, plus additional questions about his SEAL service, about the specific techniques he'd used in the ballroom, about whether he'd had any contact with any of the individuals identified from last night's team. The 2 unnamed agents pushed harder than Harlow on the classified service question, and Damon pushed back in the way you pushed back when you knew the rules, invoking the clearance process, referencing the appropriate channels, being genuinely cooperative about everything that was legitimately in front of him, and genuinely immovable about everything that wasn't. They let him go at 10:15. He went home, and he moved Lily, who had come back upstairs with Mrs. Petrakis' help while he was in the interview, from her bedroom, which faced the street, to the interior of the apartment, which he explained by telling her the window in her room needed maintenance. Lily accepted this without question because she found apartment maintenance genuinely interesting and had on 3 separate occasions asked Damon if she could watch him fix things in the building. "Can I bring my whale?" she asked, meaning the model. "Bring whatever you want." She brought the whale, 4 library books, her drawing supplies, and a stuffed penguin she'd owned since she was 4 and would die before admitting she still slept with. She set up in the hallway between the 2 interior walls with the focused efficiency of someone relocating a small office. Damon watched her and felt something that didn't have a clean name. Not quite fear, not quite tenderness, a compound of both that sat in his chest with a specific weight. "Dad?" Lily said, not looking up from the whale's partially assembled tail section. "Yeah." The news this morning said there was a thing at a fancy building downtown. He'd been waiting for this. "Yeah." "Were you there?" She looked up now. Lily had her mother's eyes, dark and direct, and the habit her mother had of asking questions she already half knew the answers to. Damon sat down on the floor across from her. "Yes." "Were you okay?" "I'm fine." She considered this for a moment with the particular solemnity that 9-year-olds brought to things they sensed were more serious than they were being told. "The news said one person stopped all the bad guys. They didn't say who." "I saw that." "Was it you?" He looked at her. He'd made a rule early on, not as a policy, just as a decision he'd come to, a quiet one, that he would not lie to his daughter. He would protect her from information she didn't need to carry, but he would not look her in the eye and tell her a false thing. "Yes," he said. Lily was quiet for a few seconds. Then, "Because of the SEAL stuff." "Because of the SEAL stuff," he said. She nodded slowly, processing. "Okay." She looked back at the whale. "I'm glad you're okay." "Me too, kid." She picked up a piece of the model and studied it. "Are we going to be okay? Like, now?" That question, the directness of it, the simple honesty, the way she asked it without dramatics because she trusted him to answer it the same way. He looked at his daughter sitting on the floor of their apartment with the half-finished whale and the stuffed penguin, and he thought about Helix Group and Brenner and Radu Conescu and a photograph of a man who had never believed anyone could touch him. "I'm going to make sure we are," he said, which was not the same as yes, and they both knew it, and she nodded and went back to the whale and didn't push further, and he sat there with her for a while because right now, sitting on this floor, was where he needed to be. His phone buzzed at 2 in the afternoon. Caldwell, again. Different number. "Package incoming. Your door. Don't open it in front of the girl." Damon waited until Lily was absorbed in one of her books, then went to the front door. A small bag on the mat, no markings. Inside, a burner phone, 2 small tracking devices with a note explaining their range, and a folded paper with a handwritten address and the words 0600 tomorrow underneath it, and a small separate note below everything else. Autopsy on the building's security chief, Marcus Chen, came back. He was poisoned. Not killed during the operation, killed 4 hours before it started. They had an inside source. Building staff or event catering. "We're running it down, but you should know." Damon read this twice, then folded the paper and pocketed it. 4 hours before the operation started, which meant while Damon had been getting ready for his shift, eating whatever he'd had for dinner that night, he couldn't even remember now. Something simple. He was always too tired on Friday evenings to cook properly. Marcus Chen had already been dead. The party had gone on. 300 people had laughed and toasted and clinked their glasses while the building's security chief lay somewhere cooling, and the people who had done it were already in position, already moving through their timeline. He thought about the inside source, building staff or catering. That was 140 possible people on a Friday night. He thought about Briggs, the facilities manager, who had specifically directed him to the east restroom and the service corridor at a time that, in retrospect, placed Damon within range of the east lobby when the operation started. Briggs, who had told him the guests didn't want maintenance visible. Briggs, who had a job that gave him access to every part of the building's layout and every shift schedule. He didn't know. He was drawing lines between points, and the lines might be wrong, but he noted it, filed it, held it loosely. The afternoon passed with the particular slowness of waiting. Lily finished 2 chapters of her marine biology book and showed him, in detail, the difference between a giant squid and a colossal squid, which was apparently very meaningful, even though to Damon they seemed broadly similar. He listened because it mattered to her and because listening to Lily explain things she cared about was one of the cleaner pleasures his life had managed to retain. At 5 o'clock he made dinner. Pasta, which was what he made when he couldn't think of anything else. And it was fine, not great, and Lily ate it with the generous diplomacy she showed toward his cooking when she was in a good mood. At 8 she was in her relocated sleeping space, the stuffed penguin tucked under one arm, the ocean documentary playing low on the small speaker he'd moved from her room. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her settle. "Dad?" "Yeah. If we had to move again," she said it carefully, the way she chose words when she'd been thinking about something for a while. "Like to a different city, or whatever. It would be okay." He was quiet for a second. "We're not moving. But if we did," she looked at the ceiling, "I'd be okay. I want you to know that." The thing that lived behind his sternum with no clean name moved again, shifted its weight. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the makeshift bed and rested his hand briefly on top of her head, which she tolerated about 30% of the time, and this was apparently one of those times. "I know," he said. "I just thought you should know." "I know, Lily." She closed her eyes. He sat there until her breathing changed, until the even rhythm of sleep replaced the small tension of wakefulness, and then he stayed a little longer just because he could. By 9 o'clock, he was at the kitchen table with the burner phone and the tracking devices and the address, making plans. By 10, he had called Caldwell's new number and had a 20-minute conversation that confirmed several things he'd suspected and introduced several things he hadn't. Vivian Ashford had told the FBI everything about Project Nightingale. The access log, the copied data, the fact that she was the sole holder of the calibration parameters. She had also, Caldwell said with something that might have been respect in his voice, independently identified Gregory Fell as the source of the leak, an analysis she'd completed between midnight and 2 in the morning using her own backups, before any federal investigator had asked her to. "She's not a liability," Damon said. "No," Caldwell agreed. "She's actually the only person with enough technical knowledge to help us understand what Helix can do with what they've got. But that makes her more of a target, not less." A pause on the line. "Brenner is in the city. We picked up a signal trace 6 hours ago. He's reorganizing." "How long before they move again?" "Our assessment is 36 to 48 hours. Maybe less if they feel rushed." Another pause, longer. "Cross, I want to be clear about what I'm going to ask you tomorrow morning and what it means if you say yes. This is not a recall. This is not an order. You've been out of the system for 6 years and you have a daughter and you have a life, however quiet, and I am not authorized to compel you to do anything." The words came with the care of someone who'd thought about how to say them. "But Vivian Ashford is going to need protection over the next 48 hours that the FBI cannot adequately provide, and there is exactly one person in this city I trust to provide it." Damon looked at the address on the folded paper, looked at the doorway to the room where Lily was sleeping. "My daughter," he said, "will be protected. I have 3 people I trust completely. They will not leave her. I need to meet them. Tonight." A beat of silence. "I can have them there in an hour." "Then send them," Damon said. "And Caldwell, if anything happens to her, Anything at all. I know, Caldwell said. He said it the way someone said something they meant, not as reassurance but as acknowledgement. I know. Damon hung up and sat with the quiet of the apartment for a few minutes. Somewhere outside, the city went on doing what it did. Traffic, voices, the distant sound of a siren moving away rather than coming closer. The ordinary texture of a night that didn't know what was underneath it. He opened the burner phone and sent a single text to the number Caldwell had given him for Vivian Ashford's secure line. The FBI had set it up that afternoon. He hadn't planned to use it tonight, but something Caldwell had said was sitting with him wrong, and he needed to know before tomorrow. The text said, "The partition key. Have you told anyone where you keep the backup?" 3 minutes passed. Then the response came. No. Why? He typed back. Don't. Not yet. Not even to the FBI. Can you do that? A longer pause this time. Long enough that he wondered if she was going to simply not respond, which would be the reasonable reaction from a woman who had spent the last 24 hours in a catastrophic situation taking direction from a maintenance worker. Then, yes, I can do that. Are you going to tell me why? He considered this for a moment. Then he typed, tomorrow morning. He set down the phone. He went and checked the locks on every window and the front door. He put the tracking devices in positions that would give him early warning if anyone entered the stairwell or the corridor outside. He sat down in the chair facing the apartment's front door, with his back to the wall, the same position he'd been sleeping in since last night. An hour later, there was a quiet knock. He answered it and found two people in the hallway who showed him credentials that were real, he could tell. There was a difference between someone who carried ID because they were supposed to and someone who carried it because it was simply part of what they were. He spoke with them for 15 minutes, established the protocol, walked them through the apartment's layout and Lily's routine and the three things that would guarantee Lily trusted them enough not to completely panic when she woke up and found strangers in the apartment. He went back to his chair and watched the door and did not sleep. In the morning, whatever came next was going to come fast, and it was going to require him to be every version of himself he'd ever been, including the version he'd tried to leave behind. He understood that. He'd understood it since the coffee shop with Caldwell, maybe since the elevator on the 32nd floor, maybe since the moment he'd seen the man near the elevator bank standing with his back to the wall and his eyes moving in that specific pattern. What he hadn't understood then was that the man he'd become in the quiet years, the maintenance worker, the single father, the man who made pasta on Fridays and listened to lectures about squid, that man was not a disguise he'd been wearing over the seal underneath. They were the same person. They had always been the same person. And what was coming in the next 48 hours was going to require both of them in equal measure, because tactics alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to protect someone, not just fight someone. And protecting people was something the SEAL had known how to do, but the father had learned to understand in a different and more essential way. He sat in the dark and waited for morning, and in the room behind him his daughter slept with the easy depth of someone who trusted the person standing watch. He was not going to fail that trust, whatever it cost. Caldwell's address turned out to be a parking structure on the edge of the financial district, 3rd level, northeast corner. The kind of meeting location chosen by someone who had spent enough time in the business to understand that restaurants and coffee shops, however ordinary they appeared, had too many variables. Parking structures had one entrance and exit per level, predictable foot traffic, and the ambient noise of the city without the ambient ears. Damon got there at 5:58 and spent 4 minutes doing a slow circuit of the level before approaching the black sedan in the corner. Old habit. Caldwell was already inside, Borim, engine off, looking at a tablet. A second man was in the passenger seat, younger, broad-shouldered, with the specific kind of stillness that came from professional training rather than personality. Damon got in the back. "This is Rennick," Caldwell said, not looking up from the tablet. "He's been running surveillance on Helix's local assets for the past 72 hours. Rennick turned and gave Damon a look that was evaluating without being unfriendly. "I watched the ballroom footage," he said, 4 times. "And?" Damon said. "And the coffee urn throw was either inspired or insane, and I'm still not sure which. It worked?" "That's usually my deciding factor, too." He turned back to the front. Whatever assessment he'd been running, it seemed to have concluded satisfactorily. Caldwell set the tablet on the center console so Damon could see the screen. A floor plan. A residential building, high-rise, the kind that had been built in the last decade with the specific architectural language of luxury. Clean lines, large windows, a penthouse level set slightly back from the main facade. Vivian Ashford's building. She lives on 38 Penthouse Access. The FBI has 2 agents stationed in the lobby and 1 on the floor. That's it. That's not enough, Damon said. No, it isn't, which is why I pulled Rennick off the surveillance detail to brief you. Caldwell tapped the screen. Brenner made contact with 3 additional contractors overnight. We picked up the communication through a channel we've had compromised for about 8 months. They don't know we're listening, which is the only advantage we currently have that I'm unwilling to sacrifice. Which means we cannot tip them off by moving Ashford to a protective location through official channels. The moment Brenner sees FBI vehicles and a motorcade, he burns the channel and we lose the intelligence feed. So instead you keep her where she is and let them come to her. We keep her where she is, Caldwell said, and we make sure that when they come, they find something they didn't plan for. Damon looked at the floor plan. 38th floor. He counted windows, estimated room layouts, thought about approach vectors, stairwells, elevator shafts, the rooftop access that every building this height had to have by fire code, the ventilation system that would be the secondary approach if the primary got compromised. When? Rennick's assessment is tonight. Helix knows the FBI's window is closing. The more time passes, the more their evidence trail gets built out. They'll move while there's still a chance of containment. Does Ashford know? Caldwell paused. She knows there's an elevated threat. She doesn't know the specific timeline. She needs to know, Damon said. If she's in that apartment when it starts and she doesn't know what's coming, she becomes a liability instead of a participant. I've seen what panic does to a space. I'm not managing an operation and a panicking civilian at the same time. Caldwell looked at him steadily. She's a civilian, Cross. She's not. She stayed under a table for 11 minutes in a live fire situation and did exactly what I told her. She analyzed a server access log and identified her mole independently at 2 a.m. after surviving an armed extraction attempt. Damon held Caldwell's gaze. She's not a liability if she knows what's happening. She becomes one if she doesn't. Tell her. A beat of silence. Rennick was looking at the windshield, very deliberately not interjecting. I'll brief her at noon, Caldwell said. You'll be there. Yes. Caldwell picked up the tablet. There's something else. He pulled up a second file, a communication intercept, text-based, partially translated from a cipher. We pulled this at 4 this morning. Brenner's message to Konescu after the ballroom operation failed. He handed the tablet back so Damon could read it. The message, stripped of its operational jargon, said 3 things: that the extraction had failed, that an unknown operator had intervened, and that the unknown operator had been positively identified as a subject from a previous classified operation who was believed deceased. It used a code name rather than a real name, but the code name made Damon's jaw tighten. Archangel. That was what they'd called him. Not Ghost. That was what the teams called him. Archangel was the name the other side had used, the name that had come out of interrogations and signals intelligence during Seawolf, the name given to the SEAL operator who kept appearing in places he shouldn't have been able to reach, and doing things that, by their assessment, shouldn't have been possible. They'd believed he was dead. Brenner had corrected that belief. Konescu's response? Damon asked. Caldwell took the tablet back. 2 words. We recovered them 6 hours ago. He read them aloud. Finish everything. The parking structure was quiet around them. Somewhere below, a car engine started and moved toward the exit ramp. The city outside was beginning its morning without any particular awareness of the instructions that had just been relayed into it. Finish everything. Both targets, then. Not just Vivian Ashford. Damon, too, and by extension, the thought arrived cold and complete, anyone connected to him. Caldwell's people at the apartment were good. He'd assessed that last night. But good and sufficient were different measurements when Konescu was the one sending the instruction. Lily? Damon said. Already moved, Caldwell said. An hour ago. She and Mrs. Petrakis are at a secondary location. She's been told it's a building safety inspection. He watched Damon's face. My people will not leave her. Damon breathed through the tightness in his chest and filed it. Filed the fear, filed the anger, filed all of it into a compartment he would not open again until this was over. He could not afford those things tonight. He could carry them after. "What do I have to work with?" he said. Rennick pulled a bag from the footwell and set it on the seat beside Damon. "Sidearm, 2 magazines, tactical radio with encrypted frequency. Vest is in the trunk. It won't stop rifle rounds, but it'll give you something. 2 flashbang units." He paused. "I know it's not much." "It's enough," Damon said. Because it was. It had always been about the space and the timing and the decisions more than the equipment. Equipment was the variable people focused on when they hadn't been in enough situations to understand what the constant was. The constant was what happened inside your head when everything went wrong at once. He had spent most of his adult life managing that constant. The meeting with Vivian happened at noon in her penthouse, and she opened the door herself, which told Damon the FBI agents on her floor were either incompetent or had been told to give her space. She was in a gray sweater and dark pants, hair pulled back, no makeup, and she looked not exactly well because no one looked well 24 hours after what she'd been through, but functional, which was its own kind of impressive. There were documents spread across the dining table and a laptop open on the kitchen counter and a coffee mug that looked like it had been refilled several times. She looked at Damon when she opened the door, and then she looked at Caldwell standing behind him, and then she stepped back to let them in without saying anything, which was the response of someone who had already processed that the situation was worse than she'd been told, and had decided to simply receive the new information rather than react to the gap. "Sit down," Caldwell said. "I prefer to stand," she said. Not combative, just a statement of preference. Caldwell looked briefly at Damon. Damon made a small gesture that communicated, as clearly as he could manage non-verbally, let her stand. Caldwell turned back to Vivian. He told her about Brenner's regroup, the 3 new contractors, the timeline. He told her about the intercept and Konisku's instruction. He did not tell her about Damon specifically, about Seawolf, about Archangel. And Damon didn't fill in the gaps because those gaps weren't relevant to what she needed to understand right now. She listened to all of it with her arms crossed and her eyes on Caldwell, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So the FBI agents on my floor," she said. "Are not enough," Caldwell said. "No. And your solution is—" She looked at Damon. "Him." "Yes." She looked at Damon for a long moment. "You have a daughter," she said. That surprised him. Not the fact itself, but that she'd led with it. "Yes." "Is she safe?" "She's been moved. She's safe." Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, more like a recalibration, a piece of information being integrated that changed the weight of something else. "Okay," she said. To Caldwell. "What do you need from me?" "Your full cooperation with whatever Cross tells you tonight," Caldwell said. "And the partition key." She looked at him flatly. "The FBI has been asking for that for 16 hours. "I know, I need it too, but through different channels. Ones that won't alert Helix before we're ready." Vivian was quiet for a beat. Then she walked to the kitchen counter and picked up her phone and opened something on the screen and turned it toward Caldwell. He looked at it, nodded once, and took a photograph of the screen with his own phone. Then she turned it back and closed the app. "That's everything?" Caldwell said. "Everything they'd need to understand what they have and how far along they can get without me." She set the phone down. "If they try to implement what they copied without the calibration parameters, they'll get a functional system. It'll work. But it'll have a deviation error that compounds over long distances, a navigational drift of about 3.7 meters per 100 kilometers, enough to matter enormously in precision applications." Caldwell looked at her. "You're saying what they stole is incomplete in a way they may not fully understand yet. I'm saying they have a weapon with a flaw they don't know about." She said it without satisfaction, just as a fact. "Which won't help anyone if they deploy it before they figure it out, but it might help you predict their timeline." "They'll need to test it," Damon said. He'd been quiet until now, standing by the window with his back partly to the room, watching the street below out of habit. "Before any operational use, they'll run a field test. If they can calculate the deviation, they'll try to get the correction parameters elsewhere. reverse engineer from the architecture, find another source inside Ashford Industries. Which means time, Caldwell said. Some, not much. Damon turned from the window. Tonight is still the night. After Caldwell left, it was just the two of them in the penthouse, and there was a particular silence that followed. Not uncomfortable, but dense. The kind that accumulated when two people had been through something together and were now facing more of it, and the ordinary social scripts didn't quite apply anymore. Vivian poured herself another coffee and held the mug with both hands and looked at him. "Do you want some?" "Please," Damon said. She poured a second mug and slid it across the counter, and he picked it up and they stood in the kitchen of her penthouse, 38 floors above the city, drinking coffee in the early afternoon quiet. And for a moment, it was almost ordinary. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Last night, in the ballroom." She turned the mug in her hands. "When you came to the table, you'd done all of that, and then you crouched down and you talked to me and you were completely calm. Not performing calm, actually calm." She looked at him. "How?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "When you're moving, you don't feel things," he said. "It's not that the feelings aren't there. It's that there isn't space for them while the moving is happening. You file them. You feel them later." "And later?" "Later is later." He took a sip of the coffee, which was considerably better than the precinct coffee from the night before. "I've had a lot of practice with later." She looked at him for a moment. "That sounds lonely." He hadn't expected that. Not the observation itself, it was accurate, but the directness of it, the lack of any cushioning around the word. "It's effective," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked down at her mug. "I've been running a company since I was 22. My version of that, the filing things away, keeping moving. I know what you mean. I do that too. A beat. I don't know if I'd call it lonely. I never really had time to notice." "Last night you noticed," he said. She looked up. "Yes." A pause. "Under the table when you left, I noticed it very much." He nodded. He didn't offer anything more than that, and she didn't seem to expect him to. And after a moment she straightened up, and the CEO posture reasserted itself, not defensively, but naturally, the way people return to their defaults when the moment of openness had run its course. "So what do we do now?" she said. "Until tonight." "You walk me through the apartment," Damon said. "Every room, every door, every window. I need to know this space the way I knew the ballroom." He spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that, not just looking, but thinking, the way he always thought about spaces, where the angles were, where the cover was, where the approach vectors came from. The penthouse had an open main floor, living area, kitchen, dining room all connected, large windows on 3 sides, which was both the selling point and the primary tactical problem. Too many entry points if someone came from the roof. The stairwell access was at the east end of the floor, elevator at the west. There was a service corridor that ran along the north wall, used by building maintenance, and that was the one that concerned him most because it was the one the FBI agents on the floor didn't know about in the same detail that building management did. "You know this building's maintenance layout?" he asked. "Generally," she said. "I need more than generally. Is there a building manager I can talk to?" She made a call. 15 minutes later, a woman named Sadie, the building's operations manager, was in the penthouse with a full set of floor plans, looking at Damon with the expression of someone who didn't entirely understand what was happening, but had decided to be helpful anyway. He spent 30 minutes with the plans and Sadie's working knowledge and came out of it with a clear picture of every way in and every way out. Then he started turning the penthouse into something different. Not visibly. He wasn't moving furniture or setting up barricades, because that would signal to anyone watching that the target was fortified and might change Brenner's approach in ways he couldn't predict. What he was doing was subtler, identifying which pieces of furniture would provide actual cover versus concealment, noting the position of the kitchen counter relative to the main entry points, understanding the geometry of the service corridor door in relation to the living room's main sight lines. He moved 3 items. A heavy floor lamp, repositioned so its absence from its original location created a shadow pocket near the kitchen. A decorative cabinet shifted 6 inches so its edge no longer marked a clean corner for someone to clear. A chair moved from the dining area to a position that looked casual and was actually a place from which 2 of the 3 main entry points were visible simultaneously. Vivian watched him work and didn't ask questions, which he appreciated. At 4 o'clock, he radioed Rennick. "Anything on Brenner's position?" Last confirmed signal trace was 2 hours ago from a location about 8 blocks north. He's gone quiet since, which usually means he's moved into prep. A pause on the radio. "Cross, we pulled the background on the 3 contractors he brought in. One of them is a woman named Hayes. She's a specialist. Her file is about 6 different kinds of ugly. Breach and clear, close quarters. She's the kind of person Brenner brings in when he needs a room cleared fast and quietly. What's her preferred approach vector?" "Elevated. She likes coming from above when the option exists." Damon looked at the ceiling, looked at the rooftop access point he'd identified on Sadie's floor plans. "Okay? Okay meaning you have a plan, or okay meaning you're going to figure one out?" "Both, probably." He clicked off the radio. Vivian was standing by the window, looking at the city in the afternoon light, and he went and stood beside her. Not close, a few feet of distance, but close enough to talk without raising his voice. "When it starts," he said, "I need you to do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it. Not a second of delay, not a question in the moment. We can talk about why afterward. During, it's just action and response." "I understand." "You said that in the ballroom, too." "And I did what you said," she pointed out. "You did," he said, "but this is going to be harder than the ballroom. In the ballroom, you were under a table. Tonight you may be moving with me through an active situation." She turned from the window to look at him. "Then tell me what I need to know." He spent the next hour doing exactly that. Not tactical training. There wasn't time, and she wasn't a soldier, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of danger. What he gave her was simpler and more essential. Where to be in each room when things started, how to move low without losing speed, what the difference sounded like between a shot fired in an enclosed space and one fired from distance, and the single most important instruction. If she got separated from him, she went to the northeast corner bathroom, which was the most interior room in the apartment with no exterior windows. And she stayed there until either he came for her or federal agents came with a code word he would give her now. The code word was whale. She looked at him when he said it. "That's an odd choice." "It'll be memorable." Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but close to it. "It will be," she agreed. At 7, the FBI agents on her floor changed shift. The 2 new agents introduced themselves and did a sweep of the floor, and then took up positions in the lobby outside the elevator. Damon watched them through the penthouse door's peephole and noted that they were good at looking like security and probably adequate under normal circumstances, and nowhere near sufficient for what Brenner was bringing. He did not say this to Vivian. At 8:30, she made them dinner. He would not have asked her to, and was not entirely sure what to make of the fact that she did it without asking, just went to the kitchen and started cooking with the focused efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. It was a simple thing, pasta, of all coincidences. And he sat at the kitchen counter and watched her cook and thought about Lily sitting with Mrs. Petrakis at whatever safe location Caldwell had chosen, probably asking questions about cephalopods, probably watching ocean documentaries. "You're thinking about your daughter," Vivian said, not looking up from the pan. "How do you know?" "Your face does something when you're somewhere else. Goes quieter." She stirred the sauce. "How old?" 9. "What's she like?" He thought about how to answer that. "Stubborn, smart. She's got opinions about everything, and she argues for them like she's presenting a legal case. She's in a phase about marine biology." He paused. "She's the best thing I've ever done." Vivian was quiet for a moment, stirring. "Her mother?" "Died 4 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He said it simply, not as a deflection. She would have liked the squid phase. She was like that, interested in everything. Vivian put the plates on the counter, and they ate standing up because sitting at the dinner table felt, in the context of the evening, like a strange performance of normality. The food was good, better than his pasta by a considerable margin, though he kept that observation to himself. They talked somewhat about things that had nothing to do with what was coming. She asked about his work at the building, the actual work, and he found himself talking about it without the slight embarrassment he sometimes felt, because she asked with genuine curiosity rather than politeness. He asked about the company, and she talked about it the way people talked about the things they'd built, with ownership and tiredness and a complicated pride. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Before it was this big?" She thought about that. "I miss knowing everyone who worked for me. In the beginning, it was 11 people, and I knew their kids' names and their bad days and why they'd taken this particular job." She looked at her plate. "Now it's 430 people, and I know my direct reports, and I'm lucky if I know the next level down." A pause. "That's what success looks like, apparently. Is it worth it?" "I used to think obviously yes, without question." She was quiet for a moment. "After last night, I'm less sure what I think." He didn't press that. It wasn't his to press. At 10:15, Rennick's voice came through the radio with the particular flatness of someone transmitting bad news calmly. "We've got movement. 3 individuals entered the building via the parking structure 30 seconds ago. Staff uniforms. Building management says they don't have a maintenance crew scheduled tonight." Damon was already moving toward the kitchen, where he'd left the vest. "How long to the 38th floor via the service stairs?" 7 minutes if they're not rushing, less if they are." "Vivian." She was already on her feet because she'd been watching him, and she'd understood the moment the radio crackled that the before part of the night was over. "Northeast bathroom. Now, take your phone. Do not use it unless you tell me to," she said. "I know." The code word, whale. "I know." She was moving. "Be careful." He didn't answer that. He pulled on the vest, checked the sidearm, checked the radio frequency, and moved to the service corridor door on the north wall, the one Brenner's team probably knew about and probably expected to be unwatched, which was exactly why Damon intended to be standing behind it when they came through. He positioned himself in the shadow of the heavy supply cabinet he'd noted on his walkthrough that afternoon. The service corridor beyond the door was narrow, lit by fluorescence every 12 feet, and the door itself opened inward on his side, which meant when it opened, the first person through would be exposed before they saw him. He waited. Rennick's voice, barely above a whisper now. "Elevator traffic on 35. They split. 2 in the service corridor. 1 went to the roof." The woman. Hayes. Going from above. He keyed the radio once, the pre-agreed signal for message received, and then went silent. He needed to hear. The service corridor door opened at 10:22. The first man through was fast and professional, weapon up, moving to the left on entry the way training dictated. And he found the shadow of the cabinet where he'd expected a clear corner, and in the half-second of confusion that created, Damon came off the wall. He had trained with people who talked about close-quarters combat the way enthusiasts talked about anything. The technique, the mechanics, the theory. What they almost never talked about, because it didn't transmit well in language, was the specific kind of decision-making that happened in a space this small, this fast, with this many things happening simultaneously. It wasn't really thinking, it was pattern completion. You read the configuration, and your body knew what needed to happen before your conscious mind had finished forming the sentence. The first man was down before the second one cleared the doorframe. The second man was faster and had expected something to be wrong. Damon could read that in how he came through, lower, weapon already adjusting. He fired once, and the shot took the cabinet door instead of Damon because Damon had already stepped behind it, and the return from Damon was not a shot but a crash. The cabinet itself, shoved hard off the wall and into the second man's path, buying a half-second that was enough. The hallway noise would bring the FBI agents from the lobby. That was accounted for. What wasn't accounted for was the sound from above. A thud through the ceiling, 1-2, then a scraping sound that meant Hayes was already through the rooftop access and moving to the penthouse's upper level. Damon left the second man immobilized and moved. The roof access inside the penthouse opened into a small utility room above the master bedroom. He took the interior stairs fast, 3 flights, and came out at the top to find the utility door already open and the sound of movement on the far side of the master bedroom wall. He came through the master bedroom and into the hallway and found Hayes coming the other direction. She was short, quicker than she looked on paper, and she'd already assessed the floor plan because she moved like someone who knew where she was going. She was heading toward the northeast corridor, toward the bathroom. "Stop," Damon said. She didn't stop. She was faster than stopping. What followed was not clean. This was the part of these things that didn't transmit in footage. The struggle in an actual hallway, in actual darkness, against someone who was trained and committed and did not intend to stop. She hit him twice in the left side, which found the cracked ribs Caldwell had mentioned that morning, and the pain was real and immediate, and he filed it the same way he filed everything. He caught her weapon arm on the third movement, and she tried to turn it into a throw, and he let her try and use the momentum against her, and they went into the hallway wall hard enough to put a visible dent in the drywall. She was good. She was very good, actually. In another context, he might have been straightforwardly impressed. She got a hand free, and the hand had something in it. A secondary blade. Compact. Which meant she'd planned for exactly this kind of close engagement. She drove it at his right side, and he took it on the forearm instead of the torso, which was better, but not good. And the pain was sharp and real, and he used it because pain was information, and information was useful. He had her weapon arm controlled. She had his right forearm. They were locked for approximately 2 seconds in the hallway, both breathing hard, and in those 2 seconds something shifted in the calculus because he was bigger and his position on her arm was more mechanically favorable, and she was calculating the same thing he was, that this was going to resolve one way. She made the decision to break and run for the bathroom door. She got 3 steps. The bathroom door opened outward, hard, fast. The edge of it caught Hayes across the face with the full weight of a heavy interior door being thrown open by someone who understood exactly where she was standing because she'd been listening to the footsteps in the hallway for the past 45 seconds. Hayes went down. Vivian stood in the bathroom doorway with her shoulder against the door and her chest heaving, looking at the woman on the floor and then at Damon and then back at the woman on the floor. "She was going to open the door," Vivian said. Her voice was shaking, a little. I could hear her hand on the handle. "Yes," Damon said. "So I opened it first." "Yes." Vivian looked at the door, looked at her own hand still gripping the handle. "Okay," she breathed out. "Okay." "You did exactly right," he said. It came out with more weight than he'd intended because he meant it completely. Not as reassurance, but as fact, the clean, simple fact of it. She had heard, and she had acted, and she had been right. From somewhere below them, the sound of federal agents moving through the floor, radio voices, controlled shouting, the mechanical sounds of a space being cleared. Rennick's voice came through his earpiece. "FBI has the service corridor. 2 in custody. Is Ashford secure?" Damon looked at Vivian. "Secure," he said into the radio. She was still holding the door handle. He crossed the hallway and put his right hand, the one that wasn't bleeding, briefly on her arm, just long enough to communicate something that language didn't have a clean form for. She looked at him, and her eyes were bright with the particular intensity of someone who had just processed that they were still alive, and she nodded once, sharply, the way she'd nodded at everything all evening. Then there were voices at the end of the hall, and badges, and the controlled chaos of federal agents sweeping a space, and Damon stepped back and gave them room. He stood against the wall and breathed carefully, not drawing attention to the arm or the ribs, watching the agents work, listening for Rennick's updates through the earpiece. Below, the building was being locked down. Brenner's 3 contractors were accounted for, 2 in the service corridor, 1 face down in Vivian Ashford's hallway. But Rennick's voice, when it came again, carried the particular tone of someone delivering incomplete good news. "Cross, 3 contractors confirmed down, but Brenner is not among them. He wasn't in the building." Damon processed this. "He sent them in without coming himself. He's managing from outside, which means he knows how it went, and he's still out there." Damon looked at the hallway, at the agents, at Vivian sitting on the bathroom floor now, with an agent crouched beside her and a blanket someone had produced from somewhere. She was talking to the agent clearly and steadily, the shaking in her voice resolved, the CEO part of her reasserting itself, even sitting on a tiled floor with a blanket around her shoulders. Brenner was still out there. And Konisku's instruction, finish everything, was still in effect. Damon felt the arm, assessed it with the part of his brain that cataloged damage without sentiment. Deep cut, not arterial, would need attention but was manageable for the next several hours. Ribs were what they'd been all day. Cracked, not broken through, tolerable. He was functional. He would continue to be functional for as long as he needed to be. He pushed off the wall and went to find an agent who could get him Caldwell's direct line, because whatever came next was going to require resources he didn't have standing in this hallway, and the time between now and Brenner making his next move was not a resource he could afford to waste. The night was not finished. Not even close. The FBI medic who looked at Damon's arm in the penthouse hallway was a young man named Price, who had the efficient, no-commentary manner of someone who'd stitched people up in places considerably less comfortable than this. He cleaned the cut, closed it with 8 stitches, wrapped it, and said keep it dry for 48 hours, with the tone of someone who understood completely that this instruction would not be followed. "The ribs?" Damon said. Price pressed 2 fingers along Damon's left side with clinical precision. Damon kept his face neutral through it. 2 cracked, maybe 3. Nothing displaced. You're not going to puncture anything as long as you don't take a direct impact. He looked up. So try not to get hit there again. I'll add it to the list, Damon said. He found Caldwell in the building's management office on the ground floor, which had been commandeered as a command post. Rennick was there too, standing over a laptop, and 2 people Damon didn't recognize who had the look of signals intelligence, headphones around their necks, eyes on screens, the particular focus of people tracking something moving. "Brenner," Damon said, coming through the door. Caldwell looked up. Still dark. He went completely quiet after his team went down. No signals, no movement we can identify. He pulled out a chair and gestured at it, which was his way of noting that Damon looked like he needed to sit. Damon did not sit. "We have his last known position from 4 hours ago. 8 blocks north, a parking structure on Carver. The same one we assessed as his staging point for tonight." "He's not there anymore." "No." "Then he's either running or regrouping." Damon looked at the map on the wall, the city grid, with markers for Brenner's last known position and a cluster of markers around the Ashford building. "What's his mandate from Coniscu? Finish everything. He sent 3 contractors in here and they all went down. Does he cut his losses or does he come himself?" Rennick looked up from the laptop. "Based on his history, and we've been building his file for 18 months. Brenner doesn't leave jobs unfinished. Not because of ideology, because his reputation is the only thing that keeps him employed. If he walks away from this, Conescu doesn't use him again. Nobody uses him again." A beat. "He'll come himself." Timeline. "He'll need time to reassess, figure out what went wrong, what we know, whether this location is still viable." Rennick chewed the inside of his cheek, thinking, 6 hours. Maybe 8. He won't move until he's confident. Damon looked at the clock on the wall. 11:47 p.m. 6 to 8 hours put them at 6 or 7 in the morning, which was a timeline that could work. It gave Caldwell time to move pieces, gave Damon time to think clearly about what he was missing. Because he was missing something. He could feel it the way you felt a draft before you found the gap in the wall. "The inside source," he said. "From the first night. You said it was building staff or catering." Caldwell's expression shifted slightly. "We ran it down. The catering company had 1 employee who was flagged. A man named Dills worked the event. No history of Helix contact, but his brother-in-law has a financial relationship with a shell company 3 layers removed from Helix's funding network. We brought him in this morning." "And?" "He says he didn't know what he was involved in. That he was paid to disable the signal repeater in the building's east mechanical room and told it was corporate espionage. Nothing violent." Caldwell said it without editorial. "He may be telling the truth. People at that level often are. They see one piece, not the whole structure." "But Briggs," Damon said. Caldwell looked at him. "What about Briggs?" "The facilities manager. Night of the gala, he specifically assigned me to the east restroom. The location that put me in range of the east lobby when the operation started. He told me to use the service corridor. He knew the building layout perfectly, and he had access to every employee's position. Damon paused. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. But he knew where I was going to be. Rennick was already typing. Full name? Gerald Briggs. He's been facilities manager at Meridian Tower for 11 years. Give me 10 minutes. They gave him 12. When Rennick looked up from the laptop, his expression had the careful neutrality of someone who had found something they hadn't expected to find. Gerald Briggs has a storage unit registered under his wife's maiden name on the west side of the city. The unit's been rented for 3 years. His financial records show deposits, irregular amounts, nothing that would trigger automated flags. But when you add them up over 24 months, you get about $63,000 above what his salary explains. He paused. And his phone pinged a tower 2 blocks from Carver Street at 4 this morning. The room was quiet for a moment. He's not with Brenner, Caldwell said. It wasn't a question. He was thinking out loud. He's not operational. He's an asset. Someone Helix embedded in the building years ago against the possibility of needing access. They activated him for the gala. And he may not know Brenner's current location, Damon said, but he knows the building. And if Brenner comes back, Brenner might use him for access again, Caldwell finished. He picked up his phone and made a call. Brief, quiet, 2 sentences. When he hung up, Briggs will be in a room with federal agents within the hour. We'll know what he knows before morning. Damon moved to the window of the management office and looked out at the street. The building's entrance was visible from here. The lobby lights, the night staff at the desk, the patrol car that had been stationed outside since the operation. Normal looking, from a distance. Anybody watching from the right position would know it was anything but. The thought arrived with the specific clarity of something he'd been circling without quite landing on. Caldwell. Yeah. Brenner knows this building is compromised. He's not going to come here. He turned from the window. But he knows Vivian Ashford is the one who can identify what he took and what its limitations are. As long as she's alive and cooperating with federal investigators, his asset, the Nightingale data, has a ticking clock on it. The moment she fully briefs the right people and those people share it with defense contractors, Helix loses its technical advantage. Caldwell was watching him. Go on. So he doesn't need to come to the building. He needs to neutralize her cooperation, which he can do one of 2 ways. He comes for her directly, which gets harder every hour this building stays locked down, or he uses leverage. The words sat in the room. Rennick said it before Caldwell did. Leverage meaning someone she'd protect. Her assistant, Damon said. Elena. She was in the ballroom. She's been identified in every piece of coverage from the gala. She's not in this building. He looked at Caldwell. Where is she? The silence that followed was 3 seconds long, which was enough to answer the question before Caldwell picked up his phone again. Elena Vasquez, 26 years old, Vivian Ashford's executive assistant, had gone home to her apartment on the east side after spending 12 hours with federal investigators. She had 2 agents assigned to her building, not her floor. Her building. The call came back in under 4 minutes. The agents at her building had checked her apartment at 11 p.m. She'd been home, lights on, responding to their knock. That was 49 minutes ago. Get them back up there, Damon said. He was already moving toward the door. Caldwell was on the phone. Damon heard him, behind him, as he hit the stairwell. Need a welfare check on the assets associate right now. Apartment 614. I need confirmation of... And then the stairwell door closed, and Damon was running. He made the lobby in 40 seconds, pushed through the front entrance, flagged the patrol car. The officer behind the wheel looked at him with reasonable skepticism. A man in a tactical vest with a bandaged arm, appearing from a secured building at midnight. Damon held up the federal credential Caldwell had issued him that morning, which technically authorized him as a cooperating operative on the investigation. Elena Vasquez, 614 Orchard East. Get me there. The officer made a radio call, got confirmation in 15 seconds, and pulled out. It took 9 minutes. Damon spent them on his phone with Rennick, getting the building layout, 12 floors, 2 stairwells, 3 elevator banks, a service entrance on the south side. Elena's apartment was on the 6th floor, northeast corner. The 2 agents at the building were named Doyle and Carver. Carver answered his radio. We're outside 614 right now. Lights still on under the door. No sounds. Knock, Damon said. A pause. Knocking sounds. A longer pause. No response. Break the door. Sir, I don't have authority to... Break the door, Damon said again, with the specific flatness that communicated that this was not a discussion. He heard the door come in on the radio, heard Carver's voice go terse, "Clear, clear, bedroom," and then, "She's not here." Damon closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. Signs of struggle? Laptops open on the table, coffee's on, coats on the hook. She left fast or she was taken fast. A pause. There's a fire door at the end of the hall. It's propped open. Someone came in that way. Secure the floor. Don't touch anything. He lowered the phone and looked out the patrol car window at the city moving past. Rennick was going to need 3 minutes to pull camera coverage for the building's exterior. Brenner had moved faster than anyone had predicted, which meant either his timeline was shorter than Rennick's 8-hour estimate or, the thought was worse, he'd been planning the Elena option as a parallel track all along, and the penthouse assault tonight had been a distraction. He turned to the officer driving. "Change of location. I need to get to..." He raised the phone again. "Rennick, camera coverage for Orchard East. What's the nearest intersection with a traffic camera?" "Orchard and 51st. Give me 90 seconds. Damon waited. "Okay." Dark SUV, no plates visible, left the service alley behind the building at 11:43. Heading west. West put it toward the highway, or toward the warehouse district, which was the part of the city that the last decade of development had left behind. Empty lots, inactive commercial spaces, the kind of geography that people with things to hide found useful. Can you track it? Trying. Cameras get sparse fast in that direction. A pause. Longer. Lost it at the Junction Street underpass. Sorry. Damon's mind ran the map. West of the underpass, three logical destinations for someone who needed a controlled space quickly. The industrial zone off River Road, the Port Authority overflow parking, large covered 3 access points, or the decommissioned rail yard on the city's western edge, which had been in a permitting dispute for 4 years and sat empty. Rennick, does Helix have any property holdings or shell company real estate in the western industrial zone? Typing sounds. Rapid. 1. A logistics company called Varla Transit, registered to an address on River Road, Unit 7. It's listed as a commercial storage operation. Tax records show it's been dormant for 18 months. Unit 7, River Road. Damon told the officer driving and watched the man nod and update his radio. Then Damon called Caldwell. "River Road, Unit 7, he said. "I need a team, but I need them to hold 2 blocks out. If Brenner sees a federal response coming, he may..." "I know," Caldwell said. He sounded like he'd been on the phone continuously since Damon left the building, which he probably had. "I have a tactical unit that can be there in 14 minutes. They'll hold at Grover and River." "I'll go in first." A beat of silence. "Cross, if he has Elena Vasquez in there and he hears federal vehicles, she's a loose end." Damon said it flatly, without drama, because it was simply the operational truth. "Let me make contact first, confirm the location, confirm she's inside, then bring in the team." Another beat, longer. "You've got 8 minutes, Caldwell said. "After that, the team moves regardless." The patrol car stopped 2 blocks from River Road, and Damon went the rest of the way on foot, moving through the industrial zone the way he moved through all unfamiliar spaces at night. Not fast, not slow, using whatever shadow the streetlights left. The area was quiet in the specific way of places that didn't have residents. No domestic noise, no voices, just machinery sounds from somewhere distant, and the persistent ambient hum of the city that never fully stopped. Unit 7 was a corrugated metal warehouse, maybe 8,000 square feet, 1 large roll door on the front face, and a personnel door to the right of it. 2 windows high on the east wall, frosted glass, both showing the faint warm quality of interior light. Someone was inside. He circled the building at distance before approaching. Loading dock on the back, sealed, rusted in its tracks, hadn't moved in years. Second personnel door on the west side, padlocked from outside, which meant no one had used it tonight. Fire escape on the northeast corner, running up to a roof access hatch. He went up the fire escape. Slow, weight on the outside edges of each step to reduce noise, the way he'd done it enough times that it wasn't a decision but just a way of moving. The roof hatch was not locked. Why would it be? The building was supposed to be empty. And he lifted it 2 inches and held it and listened. Voices. Brenner's voice he recognized from the radio chatter in the ballroom 2 nights ago now. Controlled, professional, with the flat quality of someone who treated problems as administrative rather than emotional. He was speaking in English, which meant the person he was speaking to wasn't a colleague. Understand the situation. You don't need to understand it fully. You just need to understand your part in it. A woman's voice, young, trying very hard to keep steady. I'm not going to help you with anything. You're not being asked to help. You're being asked to exist. A pause. Ms. Vasquez, I don't have any personal interest in you. You're a mechanism. Your employer makes a call, she cooperates, she provides what we need, and you go home. That's it. She's not going to cooperate because of me. She'll know it's a trap. Probably. But knowing it's a trap and being willing to walk into it anyway are different calculations when the person in the trap is someone you care about. Brenner's voice remained steady throughout all of this. She'll cooperate. People like her always do. Damon eased the hatch the rest of the way open and went through it onto the warehouse's interior catwalk, a metal walkway about 15 feet above the main floor, running along the north wall. Below him, in the open center of the warehouse floor, Elena Vasquez, seated in a chair, wrist-bound with zip ties, a lamp positioned in front of her in the particular way of someone who understood that light was its own kind of pressure. Brenner stood to her left, phone in hand. 2 other men visible, one near the front door, one near the east wall. 3, and possibly a 4th he couldn't see from this angle. He looked at Elena. She was scared. The posture, the way she held herself in the chair, the slight shake in her hands. But she was also doing the thing he'd seen Vivian do in the ballroom, and that apparently this woman had learned in the same proximity. She was managing herself, breathing, staying present, not falling apart, even though falling apart would have been the most understandable thing in the world. His radio, set to its lowest volume, crackled once. Rennick. A single click. The prearranged signal. The tactical team was in position. Damon had used most of his 8 minutes getting here. He needed a decision. He could wait for the team. The team would breach the front door, and the man near the front door would have approximately 1 second of warning and would use that second to do something that neither Damon nor the team could fully predict. The man near the east wall had a clear line to Elena's position. That was the math. Or he could change the math. He moved along the catwalk. The metal was old, and old metal in buildings like this had a tendency to announce itself, and the first step he took produced a sound that was too loud for what he needed it to be. 30 feet below, the man near the east wall looked up. Damon stopped moving and became, as completely as he could, part of the shadow of the catwalk railing. The man looked for 4 seconds, found nothing, looked back down. Damon covered the remaining distance in 10 steps, spread across 15 seconds, weight distributed, breathing controlled. He was directly above Brenner now. He radioed 1 click. The team signal for on my mark. Then he dropped from the catwalk. 15 feet was not a trivial distance, and landing on a person rather than a floor changed the physics considerably. The impact took Brenner down hard and took some of Damon with it, his bandaged arm hitting the concrete floor wrong. The pain immediate and comprehensive. The cracked ribs on his left side doing what cracked ribs did when you landed on them. He filed all of it. The man near the east wall was reacting. The man near the front door was reacting. Damon had Brenner's weapon arm already, was using Brenner's own body as partial cover, and he fired the signal click twice. The team signal for breach now. And the front door came in. What followed was loud and fast, and not clean. The man near the front door was hit by the first 2 agents through the breach before he could bring his weapon up. The man near the east wall was faster and got a shot off. It hit the concrete wall 6 feet to Damon's left and sent fragments that opened a small cut on his cheek that he wouldn't notice until later. A federal agent's voice was shouting, "Clear, clear," on the floor, "Do not move." Damon had Brenner in a control position that he had to maintain one-handed because his right arm was not cooperating the way it had been an hour ago. Brenner was still fighting. He He was in his 50s and he was not a young man's build, and the drop from the catwalk had genuinely hurt him. Damon could feel it in the way he moved, the left shoulder not working properly, the breathing labored. But he was still fighting, because that was the kind of person he was, the kind who had survived long enough in this business by never stopping. "It's finished," Damon said, low into his ear. "Your team is down. The building is surrounded. There's nowhere this goes except the floor." Brenner said nothing for a moment. His breathing was rough. Then, "Conescu will send others." "I know," Damon said. "This doesn't end with me." "I know that too." A long pause. Brenner's body under Damon's grip had stopped the active resistance. Not submission exactly, but the particular stillness of someone making a practical calculation. "You were supposed to be dead," he said. "I know," Damon said for the third time. He was aware dimly that it was the same answer he'd given to different versions of this problem across the past 3 days. "Put your hands out." Brenner put his hands out. Federal agents came in and took him, and Damon let them, and he sat on the concrete floor of the warehouse for a moment, because his legs had decided they'd like a rest, and his arm was telling him something he should probably listen to. Across the floor, an agent was cutting the zip ties on Elena Vasquez's wrists, and she was talking. The rapid, pressurized talking of someone releasing everything they'd been holding for the past hour. She was okay. She was going to be okay. Damon looked up at the catwalk 15 feet above and thought about the decision he'd made and whether it had been the right one. You could always find a version of events where another choice would have been better. In his experience, you had about 48 hours of second-guessing before the evidence either vindicated the decision or didn't. And the next 48 hours weren't going to allow time for second-guessing anyway. Rennick appeared beside him, crouched down to Damon's level, which was considerate. "Arm? It'll be fine." "You reopened it." "Probably." Rennick looked at him with the expression of a man who had something to say and was choosing his words. "Brenner is the top of what we can see. Conescu is the top of what exists. Arresting Brenner tonight, this is significant. It's going to take significant time and work to get to Conescu." He said it carefully. "The chain doesn't close tonight." "I know." "You understand what that means for your situation?" Damon understood exactly what it meant. Conescu's instruction was still standing. The architect of the operation was still operational, still insulated, still capable of sending someone else. The arrest of Brenner and his contractors would hurt Helix. Hurt them badly, actually, because Brenner was a significant operational asset, but it wouldn't end them. Not immediately. "It means Lily and I need to disappear before Conescu reconstitutes," Damon said. "Yes," Rennick said. "Caldwell is already working on that. New identities, new location, full backstop. The kind that holds up to serious scrutiny." He paused. "He said to tell you it's the best work his people have ever done. He said you'd know what that means." Damon thought about it. It meant Caldwell was calling in favors he'd held for years. It meant Damon was more in the man's debt than he could easily calculate. It also meant Lily was going to have to be told something, explained something, asked to carry something she hadn't asked to carry. That part was the one he kept coming back to. He let Price, who had apparently been brought along with the tactical team, redo the bandaging on his arm. He gave a statement on the warehouse, which was shorter than the statements he'd given in the previous days because he was running out of different ways to describe things he didn't want to describe. He watched Brenner get put in a federal vehicle, not looking at anything in particular, with the contained expression of someone who had made peace with the fact that this outcome was the ceiling of what was available to him tonight. At 3 in the morning, Caldwell drove him personally to the secondary location where Lily was staying. The drive was quiet. Caldwell seemed to understand, or at least to respect, that conversation wasn't what the next 20 minutes called for. He drove. Damon looked out the window at the city, the streets at 3 a.m. having a particular quality, the people still out at this hour, mostly belonging to the city's nocturnal infrastructure, the people it ran on who were invisible to everyone else the way Damon had been invisible for 2 years. Maintenance workers, night staff, delivery drivers, the people who kept things working between the hours that the regular city slept. He thought about the 2 years, the shift schedule and the building smell and the service elevator, and Lily's school mornings and Mrs. Petrakis's eggs and the ordinary weight of a quiet life. He'd thought of it sometimes as hiding, as something temporary, holding pattern, waiting for a threat that might or might not come. He hadn't fully understood until this week that it hadn't been hiding at all. It had been living. It had been the thing itself, the real thing, not a simulation of it. "Caldwell," he said. "Yeah. The new identity, new city. Montana's been assessed as the best option. Small town, established community, low federal footprint. The cover is solid. Architect, registered license. The paperwork goes back far enough to hold." He said it with the precision of someone who had been running through it for hours. "It's not a permanent solution. Conescu's organization takes time to reconstitute after an action like tonight. Best estimate is 18 to 24 months before they have the operational capacity to resume a search. By that time, if the evidence chain we're building out reaches Conescu, you'll have him," Damon said. "We'll have him." A pause. "The goal is to have him before the 24 months are up." "And if you don't?" Caldwell's hands moved on the steering wheel slightly. "Then we revisit. But Cross, I've been doing this for 22 years. This is the most complete evidence package I've ever had against an organization of this type. The people above my pay grade are very motivated." He looked at the road. "Let us do our jobs." Damon turned back to the window. "Lily's going to ask questions. She's 9. She's 9 and she asks questions like a federal investigator. She already knew I was in the ballroom. She already knew it was me." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to lie to her. I told you that before. I'm not going to look her in the face and tell her a false thing." "Then tell her a version of the truth that she can carry," Caldwell said. Not dismissively, with the directness of someone who had, over 22 years, thought about what children were told and what that cost them. "She doesn't need the architecture. She needs to know you're safe, that she's safe, that the move is necessary and temporary. A beat. And that you chose her. That at every moment you chose her." Damon didn't respond to that. He let it sit. The secondary location was a house in a residential neighborhood, rented, unremarkable, with 3 of Caldwell's people visible, and at least 2 more he couldn't see but could place from the positions. He went inside and found Lily in the back bedroom, asleep the way she always slept, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, completely boneless in the way of children who trusted the surfaces they rested on. The stuffed penguin was there. The whale model, half finished, had been packed in a bag near the door. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. He thought about what Caldwell had said. She doesn't need the architecture. He thought about the conversation on the floor of the hallway with the whale between them, when she'd told him that moving again would be okay, and then had gone back to the model without making a performance of it. 9 years old, and she'd already figured out what most adults spent their lives trying to figure out. That you said the hard thing plainly, and then you got back to work. She'd learned that from her mother, and maybe a little from him. Her eyes opened. 9-year-olds did that sometimes. One moment completely asleep, the next just awake, no gradual transition. She looked at him and did a quick scan the way she always did, assessing his face before she said anything. "You're hurt," she said. "A little. Your arm." "It's fine. It'll heal." She looked at the bandage for a moment, then back at his face. "Is it over?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about Brenner in the federal vehicle, and Conescu in whatever insulated position he occupied on the other side of the world, and the evidence chain that Caldwell's people were building, and the 18 to 24 months that were the best estimate and the new identities that would be ready in 48 hours. "The dangerous part is over," he said. "For now." She absorbed this. For now meaning not forever. For now meaning we're safe, and we're going to stay safe, and I'm going to make sure of it. She pulled herself up to sit, the penguin ending up in her lap without any apparent decision on her part. "Are we moving?" "Yes." "Where?" "Montana." She blinked. "That's far." "It's far." "Is it near the ocean?" He almost smiled. "No, it's very much not near the ocean." "Are there interesting animals?" "Probably not the ones you've been reading about." She considered this with the particular gravity she brought to information she was integrating. "Okay," she said finally. "Will you tell me why? The real reason, not a maintenance story." He looked at his daughter in the dim light of the back bedroom, with the penguin and the bag containing the half-finished whale. He thought about the promise he'd made in the hospital room 4 years ago. He thought about the woman he'd buried who had given him this girl, this specific and particular and completely unrepeatable person, as the thing he was supposed to keep in the world. "Yes," he said, "I'll tell you the real reason." "Not tonight," she said, with the pragmatism of someone who'd determined that this was not the moment. "Tonight you should sleep. Your arm looks bad, and you're doing the face thing." "What face thing?" "The face where you're holding everything. You do it when you're tired and you're trying not to show it." She settled back down, pulling the blanket up. "We can do the real reason tomorrow, on the drive or something." He sat with her for a while after she closed her eyes. He wasn't sure she slept. Her breathing wasn't quite the breathing of actual sleep, but she kept her eyes closed and she didn't say anything else. And he stayed because staying was what he had to offer, and it was, in this moment, enough. At 4:30 in the morning, Vivian Ashford sat in the conference room of the FBI field office on the 7th floor of a building that smelled of recycled air and bad coffee, completing her 4th consecutive hour of formal debrief. The agents across from her had been rotated twice. She had not been rotated. She had not asked for a break because asking for a break felt like leaving something unfinished. And Vivian Ashford did not leave things unfinished. She had given them everything. The full Nightingale architecture, the calibration parameters in complete technical detail, the access logs, the timeline of Gregory Fell's data exfiltration, her independent analysis of what Helix could and could not do with what they'd stolen. She had answered every question with the precision of someone who understood that the value of this information was in its accuracy rather than its speed, and she had asked for nothing in return except the assurance that the technical documentation would be shared with the appropriate defense contacts so that Nightingale's vulnerability window could be closed. They had given her that assurance. She was inclined to believe it. When the lead agent told her they were done for the night and that she was free to go, she sat for a moment without moving. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the past 3 days had been on a long, slow burn, and she could feel the edge of what waited on the other side of it, a tiredness that wasn't just physical, a weight that needed something she wasn't sure debriefing rooms could provide. She thought about the warehouse on River Road, which Caldwell had told her about in a brief call 2 hours ago. She thought about Elena, who was currently at the hospital being checked over and who had, according to Caldwell, refused to be anything other than composed through the entire ordeal and had asked within 20 minutes of being freed whether Vivian was all right. She thought about a maintenance worker in a gray uniform who had crouched beside her head table and said, "I need you to do exactly what I say," and had meant it as information rather than a command. She picked up her phone and looked at the burner number he'd used for the text messages. She didn't send anything. She just looked at it. Some things didn't translate to text. Some things were better left to the fact of their having happened, carried quietly, without the diminishment of language. She put the phone in her bag and stood up and walked out of the conference room and through the federal building's lobby and out into the early morning air, which was cold and real and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building and breathed it in. Somewhere across the city, in a house Caldwell's people had rented, a man was sitting on the edge of a bed next to his sleeping daughter. And the city went on the way the city always went on, without knowledge of the things that had been fought for within it. And the morning was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. They left the city on a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. Tuesday was such an ordinary day for the kind of leaving they were doing. No ceremony to it. Damon had expected irrationally that something about the morning would feel different, that the city would register their departure in some way. It didn't. The streets were exactly as they always were at 6 a.m., the delivery trucks and the early commuters and the pigeons doing what pigeons did, completely indifferent to the gray sedan pulling away from the curb with 2 people in it and a half-finished whale model in a box in the trunk. Lily was in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up and a library book open in her lap, though she wasn't reading it. She was watching the city go past the window with the focused attention she brought to things she was trying to memorize. Damon drove and didn't push her to talk. They'd had the real conversation 2 days earlier, the way she'd requested, on a drive specifically, because Lily had determined at some early age that difficult conversations went better when nobody had to make eye contact. He'd told her as much of the truth as she could carry without the parts that would only be weight with no function. He told her that the people who had caused the trouble at the building knew who he was now and knew about her, and that the safest thing for both of them was to be somewhere those people couldn't find them. He told her it would probably be a year, maybe two. He told her that Caldwell's people were working to make it permanent, to close the threat at its source, and that when that happened, they could decide together what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives. She'd listened to all of it without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she was quiet for a while, and he let her be quiet. Then she said, "What's my new name?" He'd almost laughed, which would have been the wrong response, so he didn't. "You pick," he said. Within reason. She'd thought about it for 3 full minutes. "Lily's fine," she said finally. "I like my name. Can I keep my name?" "First name, yes. Last name changes." "What's yours?" "Callum," he said. "Daniel Callum." She tried it. "Lily Callum." A pause. "That's okay. That works." That had been the conversation. No tears, no arguments, no bargaining. Just a 9-year-old accepting the shape of her life with a pragmatism that he found, in equal measure, admirable and heartbreaking. Now they were 40 minutes out of the city, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror, the interstate opening up ahead of them into the wider geography of the country. And Lily had closed her book and was watching the road with the same expression she used when she was thinking about something too large to say all at once. "Dad." "Yeah." "Will we have a yard?" He thought about the house Caldwell's people had arranged in a small town in western Montana, which he'd seen only in photographs. "Small one," he said. "There's a back porch." "I want to get a dog." We talked about a dog. We talked about a dog in the old apartment, which was too small. The new place has a yard. She looked at him with her mother's directness. The argument doesn't transfer. He drove for a moment. "We'll see." "That means yes, eventually," she said, and went back to the window. It wasn't yes yet, but she wasn't wrong that it meant something other than no. The drive to Montana took 3 days. Caldwell had suggested flying, faster, cleaner, less exposure on the road. But Damon had asked for the drive, and Caldwell, reading something in the request he understood well enough not to question, had arranged the vehicle and the route and said nothing further about it. There was something Damon needed that only a long drive could give. The incremental distance, the country unfolding slowly, the sense of the miles accumulating between who they'd been and who they were going to be. Flying would have felt like a cut. He needed something that felt like a walk. They stopped in small towns for meals and gas. They spent the first night in a motel outside a town that had a name Damon couldn't remember by morning. The second night in a slightly better motel where the shower pressure was actually functional, and Lily declared it the best shower she'd ever had, with the absolutism of someone who'd spent 2 days in a car. They ate at diners, mostly, because Damon had always preferred diners. The specific democracy of them, the laminated menus and the coffee that came automatically, and the waitstaff who had things to do and weren't performing hospitality so much as actually providing it. On the second day, somewhere in Wyoming, Lily finished her library book and discovered she'd forgotten to pack another one, which she handled with more equanimity than he'd expected, and then compensated for by asking questions continuously for 3 hours. Some of the questions were about Montana, some were about cephalopods because she was still in the phase, and some were about the kind of things that 9-year-olds asked when they'd been in a car long enough and the guard came down. "Was it scary?" she asked. "The building, the ballroom." He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Some of it." "Which part?" "The part where I didn't know if it was going to work out." She considered this. "But you kept going anyway." "Yeah. Because of the people inside." "Because of the people inside," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Mom used to say you were the bravest person she knew. He hadn't been prepared for that one. He kept his eyes on the road and waited until the tightening in his chest had settled enough to speak. "Your mother was braver," he said. "She was braver than anyone I've ever known." "She said that about herself too," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She said she was brave, but you were fearless, and those were different things." She paused. "She said fearless wasn't always better." He drove with that for a while. "She was right," he said finally. Fearless isn't always better. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching Wyoming go past. She didn't push it further, didn't try to extract more from the moment than it was offering. That was something she'd always had. The instinct to let things settle rather than pick at them until they broke. Another thing from her mother. He missed Sarah with the particular quality of missing that didn't soften with time so much as integrate. It became part of the structure of the days rather than a wound in them, present in the texture of ordinary moments rather than arriving only in the dramatic ones. He missed her now, watching Lily watch Wyoming, and the missing was clean rather than sharp, something carried rather than something bleeding. He thought she would have had opinions about Montana. She would have researched it thoroughly before agreeing to it, made a list of the things she wanted to find there. Good hiking, a decent library, somewhere within driving distance that had live music on weekends. She would have been nervous about the size of the town, and then 3 months in would have known everyone's name. She was like that. She moved into spaces and filled them, not aggressively but naturally, the way water found the shape of whatever held it. He didn't know yet what shape Montana would have. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon, coming over a rise in the highway and finding the valley below them without warning, the mountains visible in every direction, closer than Damon had expected from the photographs. The town itself small and organized and looking, from this distance, like something out of a movie about what small towns were supposed to be. Lily sat up straighter. "Oh," she said. Just that. The house was on the east side of town, 3 blocks from Main Street, a 2-story frame house with a covered front porch and the small backyard he'd promised, and a kitchen that got morning light. The furniture was basic. Caldwell's people had furnished it from the kind of budget that prioritized functional over comfortable, which meant the couch was serviceable and the beds were fine, and the dining table was slightly too small for 2 people who spread things out when they worked. He'd fix that later. Or he'd leave it and they'd adapt. Lily walked through the rooms with the quiet focus she brought to new spaces. She was cataloging, he knew, building the internal map of a new place that she always built before she could feel settled in it. He let her do it without commentary. She went room to room, opened closets, looked out every window. She spent longest in the room that would be hers, which faced the backyard and had a window seat built into the wall below the windowsill. "This is mine," she announced. "That's yours," he confirmed. "Can I paint it? After we've been here a month?" "What color would you say no to?" He thought about it. "Probably nothing you'd actually choose." She smiled. The real one. The one that came from the side of her face the way her mother's had. Then she sat on the window seat and looked out at the backyard and the mountains beyond it, and the afternoon light came through the glass and fell across her face, and Damon stood in the doorway and understood something he hadn't been able to articulate before. He had spent 6 years thinking that the life he'd been living was the waiting room for something else, that the quiet and the ordinary were temporary, a holding state, and that somewhere ahead of him there was a reckoning that would either prove him or end him, and that the real story was still to come. The past week had felt, in some dark and complicated part of him, like a confirmation, like the reckoning had arrived and he'd passed it, and now he could return to the waiting room. But looking at his daughter on the window seat, he understood that this had been wrong from the beginning. The waiting room had been the story. The school mornings and the bad pasta and the service elevator and Mrs. Petrakis' eggs, that had been it. The real thing. Not perfect, not complete, riddled with grief and worry and the particular exhaustion of doing everything alone. But real in a way that the missions had never quite been, because the missions had always been in service of something else, something outside himself, while this was just life, his daughter's life, the one she got to have. "Dad," Lily said, not turning from the window. "Yeah. I think this is going to be okay." He stayed in the doorway. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." In the weeks that followed, the new life assembled itself in the incremental way that new lives always did, piece by piece, without ceremony, each small thing building on the last, until one day you looked around and noticed that the accumulation of small things had become something you recognized as home. He registered with the State Architectural Licensing Board under his new credentials, which Caldwell's people had constructed with the kind of depth that held up to professional scrutiny, a portfolio of prior work, references from firms in other states, a licensure history that tracked correctly. He was not a practicing architect. He had never been a practicing architect, but he'd spent 2 years learning building systems and structural logic as a maintenance worker, and he had the foundational education from before the Navy, and the rest he learned in the first 3 months with a speed that surprised even him, partly because he was good at learning things under pressure, and partly because the work required the same fundamental skill set that most of his prior work had: reading a space, understanding its load-bearing elements, knowing which walls were structural and which were just walls. He took small projects at first: a remodel assessment for a family on the north side of town, a structural review for a barn that a local farmer wanted to convert to a workshop, a porch repair that turned into a full addition design when the client's wife decided she wanted a reading room attached to the back of the house. He made mistakes, called a joist when he meant a beam, produced a drawing with a dimensioning error that a contractor caught before it became a problem, spent 4 hours in a meeting not understanding a regional code variation that everyone else in the room assumed he knew. He wrote the corrections down. He asked questions without too much pride about it. He got better. The town was small enough that new residents were noted without being interrogated. People introduced themselves, asked general questions, accepted general answers. The cover story, architect from out of state, recently relocated with his daughter, was unremarkable enough that it generated no particular interest. He was simply another person who had ended up here the way people ended up in small towns, which was usually through some combination of intention and exhaustion, and the town didn't require more explanation than that. Lily enrolled in school the second week. He'd worried about this more than most things: the social geometry of a small school where everyone already knew everyone, where a new kid in the middle of the year would be visible in a way that a new kid in September wasn't. She'd worried too, he knew, though she hadn't said so directly, because in the days before the first day she'd spent a lot of time asking detailed questions about the school layout and the class sizes, which was her way of building the internal map before she had to walk into the territory. The first week was hard. She came home quiet on Tuesday and ate dinner without offering anything, and he didn't push. On Wednesday, she came home with a library book she'd borrowed from a girl named Priya, who had, according to Lily, a completely incorrect understanding of cephalopod intelligence, but at least reads books about them, which is more than most people can say. He interpreted this as progress. By the end of the month, she had 2 people she ate lunch with, and one she called a friend, a careful distinction she maintained throughout her life about the difference between people you spent time with and people you actually trusted. The friend was a boy named Oscar, who was tall for his age and had a methodical approach to things that Lily apparently respected, and who had, she reported, exactly the same opinion about the inhaler situation: that it was for people who planned ahead, not for people who gave up, which Damon did not find reassuring but noted represented a connection being made. He called Caldwell every 2 weeks, not because there was always news, often there wasn't, but because the cadence of knowing was better than the alternative. Caldwell gave him updates in the careful language of someone who had been trained to convey operational information without creating unnecessary alarm, which meant Damon had to read between the lines, which he was good at. The case against Brenner was progressing. The evidence chain was extensive: the Nightingale data theft, the Marcus Chen murder, the ballroom operation, the warehouse, and was being constructed with the deliberate patience of prosecutors who understood that building something that held up in court was more important than building it fast. Brenner had said very little in custody, which was expected from someone of his professional background, but the documentary and signals intelligence that Caldwell's team had assembled didn't require Brenner's testimony to be compelling. Gregory Fell had, somewhat unexpectedly, cooperated. He'd been found through the access log Vivian identified, brought in quietly, and confronted with evidence he hadn't known existed. He was not a hardened operative. He was an engineer who had made a catastrophic decision for reasons that had more to do with financial desperation than ideology, and when faced with the full weight of what his decision had set in motion, he had cooperated with the specific urgency of someone trying to outrun the consequences of themselves. His cooperation had added 3 layers to the evidentiary case. Gerald Briggs had also, eventually, cooperated, with even less dignity and considerably more crying, according to what Caldwell allowed himself to relay. He'd been a Helix asset for nearly 4 years, paid in the amounts Rennick had identified. His role limited to access provision and information. He hadn't known people would be killed. This was almost certainly true and did not reduce his culpability by the amount he seemed to believe it did. Radu Conescu was the part of the updates that Caldwell delivered with the most care and Damon listened to with the most attention. Conescu was insulated. Not untouchably so, Caldwell maintained, but insulated in the way of someone who had spent decades constructing distance between himself and the things done in his name. The evidence connecting him to Helix Group's operations was strong, but not yet definitive by the standard required to move against someone with his resources and the legal teams those resources could buy. It was building. It was taking time. Time was what they had, and time was the thing Damon had the most complicated relationship with. There were nights, in the new house, in the new town, when the distance between what had happened and what remained unresolved was exactly the right length for the worst kind of thinking. He'd lie awake and run the variables. Conescu's timeline, Caldwell's confidence level, the possibility that something they hadn't accounted for would shift the calculus in a direction that brought the threat back before the case was ready. He'd run through the escape options, the contingency plans, the things he'd do if the phone rang with the news that the situation had changed. The mind built these structures automatically, or at least his mind did, and he'd learned over years that fighting the construction was less effective than letting it complete and then choosing to set it aside. What helped more than anything was the ordinary weight of the days. The school mornings were different here. Longer drives, different routines, but had the same essential structure, and the structure was something he held on to. He made breakfast, usually eggs, occasionally the pancakes Lily had determined were his best food, and she ate them while reading or while telling him things about whatever she was currently thinking about, which rotated through marine biology and architecture, which she'd developed an interest in from watching him work, and the complex social dynamics of her classroom, which she narrated with the analytical precision of someone documenting field observations. The whale model got finished in November. They sat at the kitchen table one Saturday morning and completed the remaining sections, which took 4 hours because Lily was a perfectionist about the alignments and rejected 3 pieces before finding placements she approved of. When it was done, they looked at it for a while, sitting there on the table between their coffee cups, his coffee, her hot chocolate, and Lily said, Mom would have wanted to paint it, which was probably true because Sarah had an opinion about every surface's potential. What color? Damon asked. Blue, Lily said immediately. But not just blue. She would have wanted it to look like it was actually underwater, with the light variation and everything. Can you do that? She looked at the whale and then at him. Probably not as well as she would have. But close. She thought about it seriously. Maybe close, she said. She painted it the following weekend. It took most of Saturday and some of Sunday. The result was not perfect. The light variation was more approximate than exact, and there was one section along the dorsal fin where the color gradients didn't quite blend the way she'd intended, and she noted this without dwelling on it, moving past the imperfection with the decisiveness of someone who understood the difference between a thing worth fixing and a thing worth accepting. The whale ended up on the windowsill of her room, where the morning light hit it and made the painted water look, in certain conditions, almost real. The call from Caldwell came on a Friday morning in February, 14 months after they'd left the city. Damon was at the kitchen table with a coffee and a set of drawings for a renovation project. A local family had asked him to redesign the ground floor of their house to make it accessible for a parent coming to live with them, and the geometry of it was an interesting problem that he'd been turning over for 3 days. The phone rang, and he looked at the number and knew before he answered it what kind of call it was. Conescu, Caldwell said. Damon set down his pencil. What happened? The evidentiary threshold was met 10 days ago. It took us 10 days to work through the jurisdictional architecture. He's been operating out of 3 countries, and the coordination required some patience. A pause. He was taken into custody this morning. International arrest warrant, multinational operation. He's in a facility right now that he is not going to leave for a very long time. The kitchen was quiet around Damon. The morning light was on the drawings, on the coffee cup, on the grain of the table. Outside the window, the backyard was winter bare. Brown grass, the skeletal shapes of the 2 trees that would be something else entirely by April. Ordinary things, all of them. Just the ordinary texture of a Thursday morning. The Helix Group, he said. Without Conescu, it's already fracturing. The funding network is being traced and frozen. 3 of the senior operational people are in custody or in flight. It'll take time to fully collapse, but the capability to mount anything like what they attempted is gone. Caldwell's voice had the quality of someone delivering a verdict they'd worked toward for a long time. The active threat to your family is effectively neutralized. Damon sat with that for a moment. Effectively neutralized. Not a perfect word, not a definitive closing of every door, but Caldwell was not a man who overstated, and effectively neutralized from Caldwell carried the weight of something that had been assessed with care. What does this mean for us? Damon said. It means the 18 to 24-month window has closed early. It means the identity work we did holds. The Cross identity is officially deceased in every system that matters, and the Callum identity is clean and deep. You don't have to move again. You don't have to run. A pause. What you do next is genuinely up to you. He looked at the drawings on the table. The renovation project, the family's ground floor, the question of where to put a bedroom that needed to be on the first level without losing the function of the existing spaces. A real problem. A small and specific and real problem that had nothing to do with anything except the people who lived in that house. Thank you, Damon said, for everything. You did the work, Caldwell said. I provided resources. That's generous. That's accurate. A beat. Take care of your daughter, Cross. Callum, whatever name you're using. Callum, Damon said. I've gotten used to it. After he hung up, he sat at the table for a while without picking up the pencil. He wasn't processing anything dramatic. There was no wave of relief, no emotional crescendo, nothing that felt like the endings of things were supposed to feel like. What he noticed instead was something quieter and more durable, the absence of something that had been present for so long he'd stopped noticing it. The low-grade vigilance, the constant background calculation of risk and contingency and what if. The part of his mind that had been running that calculation for 20 years, including the 6 he'd spent pretending he'd stopped. It had gone. Not silent exactly, but still. The way a sound you've lived with long enough goes still, and you realize only in the silence how loud it had been. He picked up the pencil. He worked on the drawings for another hour. Then he drove to Lily's school and sat in the parking lot until the bell rang, which was something he'd done a few times in the early months and hadn't done in a while, because the habit of watching for threats had gradually, incrementally, loosened its grip. He watched the doors open and the kids pour out in the particular chaos of school day endings, and he saw Lily come out with Oscar beside her, both of them talking with the animation of people in the middle of an argument they were equally invested in. Lily had a book under one arm, and her backpack was half open the way it always was, and her shoelace on the left shoe was untied. She saw the car and said something to Oscar and crossed the parking lot and got in the passenger seat. "You never pick me up on Fridays," she said. "I felt like it today." She looked at him with the assessment. He let her look. "Good news or bad news?" she said. "Good." She nodded slowly. Then, "How good?" "Good enough," he said. She looked out the windshield for a moment. Then she said, "Can we get a dog now?" And he laughed. Actually laughed, a real one. The kind that came from somewhere that hadn't been accessed much recently. And she looked at him with the expression of someone who knew they'd won something but wasn't sure exactly what. "Yeah," he said. "We can get a dog." They got a dog 3 weeks later, a 5-year-old rescue mutt from the county shelter, black and white with one ear that stood up and one that didn't, named whatever the shelter had been calling him, which was Biscuit, a name Lily found embarrassing and Oscar found hilarious, and Damon found so perfectly mismatched with the dog's considerable dignity that he refused to change it. Biscuit had the specific energy of a middle-aged dog who had given up on being young but retained strong opinions about where he slept, which was apparently going to be at the foot of Lily's bed, regardless of what anyone said about it. Spring came to Montana with the particular force of seasons that actually meant something, the mountains changing character week by week as the snow retreated up the slopes, the valley floor going from brown to a green that was almost aggressive in its intensity. Damon worked on the renovation project and took 2 more after it and began developing a local reputation for being thorough and for catching problems early, which was valuable and also probably inevitable given his background. Once you'd learned to read a building's failure points in a context where those failures had immediate human consequences, you didn't stop seeing them when the stakes were lower. He thought about the ballroom sometimes, about the specific decisions he'd made in those minutes and whether they'd been the right ones. Not the tactics, he was at peace with those, but the larger decision, the one he'd been unconsciously making since the moment he'd seen the man by the elevator bank. The choice to step forward rather than back. He'd framed it to himself at the time as necessity, as the only available option, but that wasn't entirely honest. There had been a back door. There was always a back door. He'd chosen to not take it. He understood now what that choice had been about, and it wasn't about the people in the ballroom, though it had been about them too. It was about something Sarah had said to him once, near the end, when the days had been very hard and he'd been struggling with the particular helplessness of watching someone he loved be unable to be helped. She'd said, "You can't protect people by staying still. You just end up protecting the stillness." He'd thought he understood that when she said it. He understood it better now. Vivian Ashford sent a message through the encrypted channel that Caldwell maintained, as she had periodically done throughout the months. She never asked where they were or who they were now. The messages were not long, a few sentences usually, and they had the quality of someone reporting in not because she expected a response, but because the act of sending mattered independently of what was received. The February message, which arrived 2 weeks after the Conescu arrest, said, "I heard the news through channels you'd probably recognize. I wanted you to know I'm glad. Also, I left the company, not because of what happened, but because of what it made me understand about what I'd been spending my time on. I'm doing something smaller now. Education. Specifically, getting technical resources to schools in places where they don't have them. It's slower and harder, and I don't know what I'm doing half the time, which is extremely uncomfortable and probably necessary." A pause in the text, then, "I think about the whale sometimes. Don't ask me why, it makes sense to me." Damon read it twice. Then he typed back through the same channel, "The whale is finished. It's on a windowsill in Montana. It looks like it's underwater." He paused, then added, "What you're doing sounds right, the uncomfortable part especially." He didn't hear back for 2 days, and when he did, it was just, "Thank you for all of it." He didn't respond to that one. Some things were complete without a response. He filed it in the place he kept things that were complete. Not forgotten, not diminished, just settled, handled. Carried the way you carried good things, lightly, without crushing them. Summer arrived, and with it the particular freedom of Lily's school schedule dissolving into long, unstructured days, which she treated as an opportunity to conduct what she described as comprehensive regional marine biology research, which in practice meant reading every book the county library had about aquatic life, discovering that it wasn't very many, and organizing an interlibrary loan campaign that the librarian, a woman named Pat, who was in her 60s and had the expression of someone who'd seen everything, described to Damon as the most organized effort by a 10-year-old this library has ever witnessed. Lily had turned 10 in April, which they'd marked with a dinner at a restaurant in town where the owner had inexplicably but sincerely decorated the table with paper fish because Lily's preference for marine biology was apparently known to most of the town by this point. Oscar had come, and 2 other kids from school, and Mrs. Petrakis had sent a card from the city that had arrived 3 days late and contained, inside it, a photograph of the 2 of them from 2 years ago that Damon hadn't known existed. Lily, at 7, on Mrs. Petrakis's couch, explaining something with her hands while the old woman watched with the expression of someone perfectly content to be explained to. He'd put the photograph on the refrigerator. He thought about identity sometimes, what it meant to carry a different name, to be, officially and legally, and in every system that tracked the existence of people, someone who hadn't existed 2 years ago. He'd expected it to feel like a loss, like something amputated. It didn't, exactly. What it felt like was a question. Who are you when everything that defined you externally is removed? The rank, the record, the history, the things other people used to locate you in the world. When those are gone, what's actually there? What was there he'd found was the same thing that had always been there. A man who fixed things and noticed angles and made bad pasta and got better at making pasta and sat on the edge of his daughter's bed until she fell asleep. A man who had loved someone completely and lost her and carried that without being destroyed by it. A man who had been capable of considerable violence and had spent years learning to live with that capability without being defined by it, to hold it the way you held any powerful thing, carefully, purposefully, without pretending it wasn't there. He was not a hero. He was clear on this. Heroes were a narrative convenience, a way of making the messy and contingent work of living into something legible and satisfying. What he'd done in the ballroom and the penthouse and the warehouse was not heroism. It was competence applied under pressure in service of specific people who needed it. He'd been scared and in pain and had made decisions that in another configuration of luck could have gone badly. He wasn't the best version of himself during those days. He was just the version that showed up and kept going, which was honestly the only version that ever counted for much. He thought about Caldwell's phrase, effectively neutralized, and he thought about how the real work of neutralizing a threat, in the long run, wasn't tactical. It was what happened after, what you built in the space that the threat had occupied. Whether you let the space be defined by what it had contained, or whether you filled it with something else. He was filling it with something else. Slowly, imperfectly, without any particular grace, but filling it. On a Saturday in late July, he and Lily drove up into the mountains on a road that one of his clients had told him about. Unpaved, winding, ending at a trailhead that led to a lake that was worth the drive. They packed a lunch and Lily brought her current library book and Biscuit came, which complicated the packing because Biscuit had opinions about car travel that expressed themselves through persistent movement between the back seat and Lily's lap. The lake, when they reached it after a 40-minute hike, was the kind of place that earned the description without trying. Mountain water, cold and clear, surrounded by the particular silence of elevation where the sound of the world below didn't quite reach. Lily sat on a rock at the water's edge and took off her shoes and put her feet in and made the sound she always made at cold water, which was not quite a word. Damon sat beside her. Biscuit investigated the perimeter of the lake with the methodical intensity he brought to any new geography, one ear up and one ear down. They ate lunch, and Lily read her book and Damon looked at the water and the mountains and the sky, which was the particular blue of high altitude that didn't exist at sea level. He didn't think about anything specific. He let his mind do what it did when he stopped directing it. Drift, circle, settle. What it settled on, eventually, was this. He was 33 years old. He had lived several lives already, and he was in the early portion of one that had no particular shape yet beyond the shape of the days that composed it. He did not know what it would become. He was, for perhaps the first time he could identify, genuinely uncertain about the future in a way that had nothing to do with threat or contingency, just the ordinary uncertainty of a life that was actually open, that could go in directions he couldn't currently see. He found that he did not mind the uncertainty. "Dad?" Lily said, not looking up from her book. "Yeah." "Do you think there are fish in this lake?" He looked at the water. "Probably." "What kind?" "I don't know, mountain lake in Montana. Trout, maybe. Some kind of trout." She considered this. "I should research that." "Probably." She went back to her book. Biscuit returned from his survey and sat between them, leaning against Damon's leg with the unselfconscious weight of an animal that had decided to trust him, which was something that had happened gradually over the 3 months of their acquaintance and that Damon found, in a way he couldn't entirely explain, meaningful. The afternoon sat around them, unhurried. He thought about what it meant to win something, not the tactical sense. He understood winning in that sense, understood it in the narrow, specific way of someone who'd been trained to achieve objectives. He meant the larger sense, the one people invoked when they talked about their lives. Did you win? Did it go the way it was supposed to go? Did you get what you were trying to get? He hadn't gotten what he'd been trying to get for most of his life. He'd been trying to get through, to survive the thing and reach the other side of it, and the thing kept being different things, kept rearranging itself into new configurations that required new kinds of getting through. And somewhere in all that getting through, he'd been watching his daughter grow into a person. This specific and unrepeatable person sitting on a rock with her feet in cold water and a book about things that lived in the ocean, and he hadn't fully noticed the growing while it was happening. And now he noticed it in retrospect, in flashes, the way you saw the shape of a landscape only once you were high enough to see the whole thing. She was going to be fine. He knew this the way he knew very few things. Not with certainty, because certainty was a story people told themselves, but with the kind of bone-deep assessment that came from watching someone clearly over time. She was going to be fine, and she was going to be interesting, and she was going to argue with people about cephalopods, and she was going to carry some things from these years that were heavier than he wished she had to carry, and she was going to be fine anyway. That was the thing he'd fought for. Not the world to be safer, or justice to be done, or the right people to be held accountable, though all of those things mattered. What he'd fought for, at the bottom of it, was this afternoon on this lake, this specific and ordinary and entirely sufficient afternoon. Lily closed her book and looked at the water. "I think there are definitely fish in here," she said. "I'm going to find out." "Research first," he said. "Research first," she agreed. Biscuit's upright ear swiveled toward something in the tree line, assessed it, decided it was not relevant. The lake held the sky's color. Somewhere above them, a bird made a sound that carried across the water and didn't require an answer. The legendary operator was gone. He had been gone for a while, honestly, longer than anyone, including himself, had recognized. What was left was a man with a dog and a daughter and a half-finished renovation drawing waiting on a kitchen table in a small town, and a set of mountains he was just beginning to learn the names of, and the whole unwritten rest of it stretching out ahead. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, he finally understood, exactly what winning looked like.